Pahayag, a forum on media freedom and responsibility. This is the first of a series of events for our joint campaign to support a free and independent media and to encourage conversations that promote media literacy. We would like to acknowledge our kind university partners in alphabetical order: the Ateneo de Manila University, De La Salle University, Miriam College, Far Eastern University, St. Paul University Manila, and the University of the Philippines, Diliman. We also have with us representatives from foreign missions, the Austrian Embassy, the delegation of the European Union, and the New Zealand Embassy. We also welcome our representatives from the media and our representatives from different government agencies, including the Presidential Task Force on Media Security. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, we would like to encourage everyone to use the hashtag Defend Media Freedom and hashtag Pahayag for your posts and discussions online. So, without further ado, to formally open the forum, may I kindly call on the President of the Ateneo de Manila University, Father Jose Ramon Villarin of the Society of Jesus, for his opening message. A round of applause, please.
Thank you, Karen. Again, sorry, the hashtag is defend media freedom and hashtag Pahayag. Okay, you will remember that. Her Majesty's Ambassador Daniel Cruz, British Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency John Holmes, Canadian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency David Strachan, Ambassador of New Zealand to the Philippines, His Excellency Jan Top Christensen, the Danish Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Franz Jessen, Ambassador of the European Union to the Philippines, our colleagues from the Presidential Communications Operations Office, esteemed members of the media, students and faculty from our different universities, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. On the occasion of World Press Freedom Day, which is on May 3, Ateneo de Manila, the Ateneo is privileged to host this forum on media freedom and responsibility, which is part of a global campaign initiated by the governments of the United Kingdom and Canada. It is a timely and significant, important forum, as the 2019 World Press Freedom Index, released by Reporters Without Borders just a few weeks ago, shows a decline, a worrisome decline, in the number of countries that are safe for journalists. It is also noted in that index that the hostility directed by political leaders against the media in many countries has incited frequent acts of violence against them, against the media. In that same index, the Philippines continues to be described as difficult. I don't know what that means, difficult. And the Philippines even dropped one spot in the comparative ranking of 180 countries. Cited specifically was the judicial harassment campaign against news website Rappler and its editor Maria Ressa, the accompanying online harassment campaigns against them, as well as cyber attacks on alternative news websites, and the site of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. Such harassment has been nothing short of systematic, calibrated, and concerted. The freedom of speech, of expression, of the press, these are all vital freedoms of democracy. And the status of these freedoms is reflective of the state of other democratic rights and freedoms: the right to life, the right to presumption of innocence, the right to due process, the right to equal protection under the law, and many others. Of course, of course, these democratic rights and freedoms assume that these are exercised with responsibility and ethical professionalism. We see responsibility here not as a constraint, though, but as a condition for freedom to mean anything at all. Freedom without borders, freedom without the borders of commitment and choice, without concern for truth and the common good, that freedom cannot be framed, cannot mean much at all. I'm happy, pleased to note that the media and the university share a common quest. A quest. We are here to seek and proclaim the truth. We are not naive when we believe that the truth does liberate us. In a post-truth world, where emotional demagoguery seems to have taken over rational discourse and decent language, we deem this quest to be more vital today than ever. We do not romanticize this quest by siding with the truth against lies that are legion and cheap, because we know all too well that the price for that choice can mean our very lives. We would rather speak truth to power and hold the powerful to account than remain silent. We would rather give voice to those whose voices have been muted at the margins than remain complicit. Because ultimately, it is our conviction that there is no truth without freedom, no freedom without truth. Interestingly, the word that is used to describe this forum is pahayag. In Tagalog, pahayag means to proclaim. In Visayan, hayag means light. Light. So on behalf of the Ateneo de Manila University, I thank you all for coming here today, for coming together to proclaim what needs to be proclaimed and to shine a light that can never be extinguished, however deep the darkness in our world today. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Father Villarin. And thank you for reminding us, again, it's hashtag pahayag and hashtag defend media freedom. And thank you also for reminding us of our duty to seek and proclaim the truth. This is again what the joint embassies have decided to do today. So the British Embassy in Manila and the Canadian Embassy have co-organized this event, and we are honored to have both ambassadors here, and we look forward to hear their thoughts on this very important initiative. So, to deliver his message, let's kindly welcome the British Ambassador to the Philippines, Her Majesty's Ambassador Daniel Cruz.
Thank you very much, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to see you all here this afternoon and to see so many of you as well. Thank you. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay sa ating forum Pahayag. Natutuwa akong makita kayo dito dahil napaka-importante ng forum ito para sa akin. So as someone who has worked very closely with the media throughout my career in the diplomatic service, I feel a strong personal attachment to the issues we're going to discuss today. Over the past 30 years, I've repeatedly admired the professionalism of great journalists producing well-researched and insightful reports, often in very, very difficult circumstances. I've also seen the damage done by reckless and irresponsible reporting. And I've seen vested interests of all sorts try to prevent journalists from doing their jobs. Above all, I've come to understand the importance of the quote that you all have on your notebooks from the great British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill. A free press is the unsleeping guardian of every other right that free men prize. It is the most dangerous foe of tyranny. A free and responsible media is fundamental to an open and democratic society, holding the powerful to account, speaking up for those who have no voice and fighting corruption. In fact, no society can ever be free if its media is not. Citizens cannot be free if the reports they read and watch and listen to have not been written, filmed, or recorded freely. So for each and every one of us, media freedom is our freedom. Ang kalayaan ng media ay ang ating kalayaan. Today's forum is part of the British government's global campaign in defence of media freedom. Our aim is to shine a global spotlight on media freedom, and in doing so, to raise the cost to those abusing or restricting it. On the 10th and the 11th of July, the British and Canadian governments will co-host a two-day international conference in London. The British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt and his Canadian colleague Chrystia Freeland will bring together ministers, business people, civil society, academia, and wider media. They will reinforce the global commitment to ensure a free and independent media, and to secure a better coordinated approach to ensuring the safety of media professionals. We will work to make existing mechanisms within the UN and in regional and international fora more effective at holding all of our governments to account and to generating real change on the ground. As part of this, we recently appointed Amal Clooney as a special envoy on media freedom. She will lead a panel of legal experts to examine initiatives that countries can adopt to safeguard and to improve media freedom. We will also promote delivery against the commitments in the Sustainable Development Goals to ensure public access to information and protection of fundamental freedoms. And of course, we will develop and work on the important link to fighting corruption and improving open government. But governments cannot do this alone. For this reason, we are also building a broad and inclusive coalition to join us in shining a spotlight on media freedom across the globe. Here in the Philippines, we are organizing a series of activities to raise the profile of media freedom, to highlight issues of responsible journalism, and to promote media literacy. We will be taking this discussion around the country with events like this in a range of universities and other institutions. We will reinforce the importance of professional journalism, including by connecting schools of journalism between our two countries so that they can work together in developing the journalists of the future. In an era of fake news, where anyone can spread a lie to millions at the click of a mouse or the tap of a touch screen, we need proper, professional, rigorous, courageous journalism more than ever. I'm delighted to be able to announce that the British Embassy here in Manila is creating a special scholarship, Achieving Scholarship for Media Freedom, under which a Filipino student can spend a year in the UK advancing their studies in support of media freedom. But our work is not just about the spoken or the written word. Photojournalism is at the heart of this effort too. And I'm delighted to be able to welcome here this afternoon the greatest British political news photographer of his generation, Stéphane Rousseau. Where is Stéphane? Stéphane, do you want to just say hello? Thank you. So we will be exhibiting some of Stéphane's remarkable photographs this evening, alongside some stunning images provided by the Photojournalist Center of the Philippines. This campaign is not anti-government. It is not anti-business. It is not anti any single individual or any political party. It is pro-media freedom. It will strengthen the global consensus that defends every day and in every country the right of journalists to do their jobs free from harassment, from threats, and from intimidation. And it will promote and celebrate the highest standards of professional journalism. The methods of those who seek to restrict media freedom are very diverse. sometimes blatant, arrest, imprisonment, torture, murder. Quite often they are more subtle, for example, through the creation of a permissive environment for verbal attacks on the media, creating a context where it is okay to denigrate journalists, or through attempting to use what appears to be due process to camouflage what is in fact harassment. We all have a responsibility to call out these acts when we see them. We all have a responsibility not to feed a pervasive and corrosive culture by just tolerating it. Last month, I was deeply ashamed to see in the United Kingdom a British TV camera crew being pushed around by a crowd in London's Parliament Square. They were just trying to film a report about Brexit. Whatever your views on an issue, roughing up journalists, or worse, is never acceptable. There's nothing wrong with disagreement, and as a former government press officer myself, I know from experience that it's natural for there to be a tension between reporters and the people they are reporting upon. You could even argue that such a tension is positive and is part of the healthy debate that characterizes and enriches our democracies. But where healthy debate gives way to threats, where it gives way to fear, we have crossed a very dangerous line. Just 11 days ago, Lyra McKee, a brave and courageous journalist, was shot dead by a masked gunman in Northern Ireland. She was just 29 years old, and she was killed while doing her job. So over the next few hours, we will have in this room a free and open discussion about all of these issues. I'm very grateful to those who have joined us as speakers and panelists, and I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us as our audience. This afternoon is a free discussion in every sense of the word. So the presentations you are about to hear have not been vetted, have not been censored. People are expressing their own points of view. You may not agree with what they say. I may not agree with what they say. But that's media freedom in action, and that is what we are here to debate, to defend, and to celebrate. So with that, let me pass you over to my joint host and dear colleague, His Excellency John Holmes, the Ambassador of Canada. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, for your excellent, very welcome introduction. Mr. President, thank you for your opening statement, and on behalf of my embassy, let me thank your colleagues here at Ateneo for welcoming us, and so many of your senior colleagues have come out to greet us at the start of this conference. The right to freedom of expression also includes the right not to express oneself. That's true. That is actually part of the right. So first of all, I'm not going to speak Tagalog. A, I don't speak it, don't speak much, and B, I would be very, very embarrassed as compared to my British colleague who speaks it quite fluently, as you heard. The other aspect of not exercising my right will be not to talk about a certain issue involving Canada and the Philippines that seems to be getting its way into the news these days. So I actually haven't read a newspaper in 2 weeks. So it's been very peaceful, and I hope it stays that way. But interestingly, I will say something in that broader context, and that is that I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be in the Philippines. We're actually celebrating the 70th anniversary of our bilateral relationship, and I am confident, as is my government, that we will continue to have very strong bonds, and those bonds will be strengthened in the years to come. I think the bonds will be very much helped by the very strong Filipino diaspora in Canada, which will probably hit 1 million people later this year. So again, delighted to be here. And I'm very pleased to partner with our friends from the UK Embassy on today's event, which focuses on the fundamental importance that a free and responsible media plays in democratic societies. And I'd like to thank formally Ambassador Daniel Prus and his team for putting this initiative together and allowing us to be part of it. Canada has a long tradition of respect for human rights generally, and especially respect for freedom of expression. In fact, our history is very interlinked, as I think many of you know, with our partners today, the United Kingdom. We are, of course, a former colony, and many of our traditions come from the British tradition, including the respect for the common law. And we'll talk a little bit later today on the importance of the judiciary in ensuring that there is freedom of expression. And I don't use the title, but you might actually be interested to know that I'm also Her Majesty's representative. We share the same Queen, as does our colleague from New Zealand. So yet again, another reason why we have such a close relationship with our friends from the UK. And if they leave Brexit and want to join Canada, we're all for that. So. But freedom of expression is a very serious matter, and just recently there was yet another annual report by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists outlining how many journalists were killed. I think the number was 54 in 2018. And we're also very concerned about threats, and I think that'll be very much a part of our discussions in a few minutes. New threats, new legislation, new regulations, and also tactics and policies that target journalists and civil society, and that inhibit or seek to inhibit the exercise of this fundamental right. And when we get to the session on responsible journalism, I want to talk about some of the international legal aspects of the restrictions, because they do exist, they are allowed at international law, but striking that appropriate balance between those restrictions and the fundamental rights is actually what is driving this issue today. So I have a few words on that. In times when fundamental freedoms and human rights are being compromised, it is the role of a capable, skilled, and responsible media not to step back, but actually to step forward and defend their rights and their obligation or their role in reporting and acting as a watchdog in democratic and other societies. And it's not sufficient for democracies that journalists are, or for states, that journalists are simply permitted to work freely. It is actually crucial that states comply with their obligations to foster a free media in their country and to enable the media to play its critical role in defending and advancing the truth. And as Ambassador Prus said, that is not always easy for countries, and especially democratically elected governments, to do, because sometimes the truth has an impact and can influence the popularity of a particular government at the time. But if responsible politicians think long-term in terms of the value to society, to the value of to the democratic country, it is something that is their obligation to do. We're going to talk a little bit about new technologies, and we're all aware of social media, we're all aware of fake news, we're all aware of new styles of journalism that are emerging, many of them very positive, but it's certainly disrupting the industry, and it's also disrupting society, so we'll have a good discussion on that. Canada firmly believes that the right to express oneself freely is the same online as it is offline, so to speak. and we're concerned about the growing trend of increased restrictions on free expression online, resulting from measures taken by governments to censor or control digital technologies. And in this challenging context, responsible journalists play a key role in helping citizens understand the issues that affect their lives. And by presenting well-researched and documented facts in a professional manner, journalists are in the front line in the battle for truth. And they are on the front line in the fight against disinformation. And they are in the front line in preserving democracy. The Canadian government has taken a number of initiatives globally and here in the Philippines to help support a free media and to defend journalists. One of our signature projects is the annual Marshall McLuhan Award, which we've been supporting for over 20 years here in the Philippines. Every year, the McLuhan Fellow undertakes a speaking tour of a number of major cities in Canada, and it's a good opportunity for that journalist to inform Canadians on what's happening here on the ground. Also, we organize tours in the Philippines with the same journalists, and a great chance to explore social, political issues with governments and with aspiring journalists and with civil society. And we're extremely proud of our roster of Marshall McLuhan Fellows who demonstrate the breadth of talented journalists here in the Philippines. Ambassador Proust mentioned the conference in July. We're delighted to be a part of that. My minister, who herself is a former journalist, Ms. Minister Freeland, will be working with Minister Hunt on making this conference a great success. Our minister has been here twice, and in one of her visits, the focus was on media freedom, and we had good discussions with representatives from different organizations here. We're confident that this conference, which is a unique opportunity to gather stakeholders from the media, government, civil society, will constitute a meaningful step against the troubling deterioration of media freedom around the world. Canada is working with our partners, including like-minded countries, the private sector, and civil society, to build a coordinated approach to countering disinformation in a proactive manner. We will ensure that our approach to countering disinformation will fully respect human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. My Prime Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau, who's been here twice as well, has said that our countries and our world are stronger and more peaceful when all people can make their voices heard and when everyone's rights are protected. Making people's voices heard is indispensable to a culture of democracy and good governance, whether in Manila, in Ottawa, in Winnipeg, Cotabato, Iloilo. Journalists must be allowed to report the facts freely and independently. And our openness may make us vulnerable, but our openness is also the source of our strength and resilience. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to gather with so many outstanding and responsible journalists from Filipino media. I hope among the audience here there's also students of journalism. And for me, this issue is not only a priority because it's the Prime Minister and my minister's priority, not only because it represents a fundamental human right, but if I could add a personal element, my daughter is just been accepted to the master's program at Carleton University, one of the best journalism schools in Canada. So she's actually going to be on the front line of this issue in a couple of years. So I'm excited about that, but I'm also nervous about that. It's a dangerous business, and it also doesn't pay very well. So I have a feeling she might be living at home with us for a little while, but we'll talk about that later. Thank you very much.
A pair of themes that we will be discussing this afternoon: media freedom and media responsibility. Whilst both are connected, we will look into them separately, beginning first with freedom. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, So we'll have a keynote speech followed by a panel discussion and then an open forum. So do, I guess, as we hear the messages of our speakers, do look into the questions that you might have or want to ask of them later. So once again, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker who will look into the challenges to media freedom. She has previously worked as a writer-producer for a late-night newscast on GMA7. Moving on to Rappler, she initially covered news involving Philippine politics, environment, agriculture, and disaster, until recently she was assigned to cover the President's activities in Malacanang. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Ms. Pia Raniada.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming and thank you for attending this forum on a very important topic, press freedom. And just to also maybe relate to the students here, I was myself an Atenean, 2012, how long was that? 7 years ago? 8 years ago. So, and I just remember also sitting there in that seat and you know, I remember Ateneo being so involved with pressing issues, and I'm just so proud that my alma mater continues to assert itself and make a stand on such an issue as press freedom. So thank you to Father Jet and to all the students, Ateneans who are not afraid to defend our democratic values. So your presence here also affirms that. So today, what I want to talk about is my experience as a journalist in this day and age. It's quite challenging to be a journalist now. And I'll be talking more on the Rappler experience because that's something I know of personally. It's something I've experienced myself. But obviously, we also want to talk about the greater press. It's something that I also see every day. I have colleagues, I work with other reporters, I work with other editors, and you know, this is something that is felt industry-wide. So just to begin, let's just start with what the government is saying about press freedom. If you listen to Malacanang, if you listen to the presidential spokesman, for them, there is no threat against press freedom. And they say that there's no threat because anyway, just a few media outlets are experiencing these attacks. Or they say that Duterte himself has never filed any liable case against a reporter. But siguro we have to contextualize what that statement means. Because if we look at the numbers in terms of attacks, in terms of moves against the media, it paints a very different picture. The CMFR, Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, reported last year, that was the Press Freedom Day last year, 2018, and they reported 85 cases of attacks against the press. This was from June 30, 2016 to May 1, 2018. And this was composed of 9 murders. I heard it's already 12 now. 16 liable cases, 14 cases of online harassment, 11 death threats, 6 slay attempts, 4 cases of web attacks, 5 cases of intimidation, and of course we know the Rappler registration revocation. And also other attacks like threats to not approve of the renewal franchise of ABS-CBN, attacks against Inquirer for the kind of reporting they do. So if you think of these numbers and then you go back to Malacanang's statement, I urge you to think independently. Can you reconcile what Malacanang said with these attacks, with these numbers? So just think about that for a second. And in a few days, we will have another Press Freedom Day, May 3, and so we will probably get an update on these numbers. And another question I want to ask, or I want you to think about is, what does it take to say that press freedom is under attack? Does it have to be 80% of media outlets being attacked? Or even if just one, is that already an attack? Because that might have an effect on the other outlets that may not be experiencing concrete intimidation tactics, but you know, it weighs on them. So yun. So just starting my presentation with that. Okay, so now I want to talk about the Rappler experience and how our time has been during these past 3 years covering the Duterte administration. So I titled my presentation "Banned but Bullish" because we may be banned, but you still read our articles and we still write about the president. So being banned is not, we're trying to work despite the ban. We're trying to give you the news despite the ban. And I think so far we've been pretty successful. Okay, so next slide. All right, so Rappler's cases, just to give you a quick rundown, altogether, the probes, complaints, and cases against us, our executives, our reporters, and a former researcher already number 11. And the mother case is, as you know, the SEC revocation of our business license to operate. And then we have 4 tax cases with the Court of Tax Appeals, a tax case with the Pasig Regional Trial Court, cyber libel with the Manila RTC, an anti-dummy case with the Pasig RTC, Securities Regulation Code violation case with the Pasig RTC again. We have another libel complaint, Quezon City prosecutor level pa lang siya. And then we have a tax audit by the Bureau of Internal Revenue. So 11 in total. Next slide. And then in numbers, the 11 cases were filed in the span of 14 months. So that's almost like 1 case a month. Maria Ressa, who is here today, let's give Maria a hand. She's here. So Maria has had to pay more than 2 million in bail and travel bonds. And she's had to post bail 8 times in 2 months. 8 times in 2 months. Next slide. Meanwhile, Imelda Marcos, who is a plunder convict, her bail is only 450,000 and she's only had to pay twice. So just think about that. Plunder convict na. Like, there has already been a decision by the court that she plundered millions from government coffers. Okay, next. Okay, so, but let's go to the beginning. Why has Rappler's coverage irked the administration? Why are they so angry with us? Well, there are 3 reasons. Number 1, we covered the drug war extensively. We cited figures from multiple sources, the police, but also NGOs, watchdogs. And so if you listen to the way Malacanang talks about Rappler, they always blame us for ruining the reputation of the Philippines internationally. Precisely because we cover the drug war extensively. The Impunity series is an award-winning series by Patricia Evangelista, and it's one of the very in-depth investigative reports we did on the drug war, which basically showed that police were actually involved in tapping local vigilante groups to kill drug addicts, drug peddlers in specific places in the Philippines, like actual barangays. We've named actual people in our reports. Also, we write about his close aides. And a lot of times, these aides are untouchables. Some media don't like to write about them because they know that they will be called fake news. They will be issued statements, condemning their reports. But Rappler continues to write about his closest aides. Also, we fact-check Duterte himself. We are a fact-checking group with Verifiles, and we continue to publish, like, we really call out Duterte or Panelo if he says something false or misleading or inaccurate. Okay, next. Okay, so let's just also remind ourselves what Duterte himself has said about press freedom. This is from the mouth of the guy, of the president. And, you can just leave, I'll just leave the quote here for you to interpret on your own. But what he said in March 2018 was, "You're investigating us. Fact-finding. Well, sorry, do not F with me. Mahirap kasi pag palabas yan, kita mo yung mga newspaper, mga Rappler, iba itong speech ko ngayon, bukas ibang presentation yan. Kaya bawal ngayon sila. That is my order. Do not talk to people who will produce lies out of your statements and who can twist it forever to the angle that they would like it to." So to the people who may not understand Tagalog, basically what he's saying in the first half is, don't talk to newspapers or Rappler-like publications because my speech today will be different tomorrow. So, don't talk to people who will, quote-unquote, produce lies. So if you think that this is just about Rappler, look at that quote, and you can see that that quote could cover any news organization who will twist his statements, aka, quote-unquote, or who will produce lies out of his statements. Because he mentions newspapers and publications like Rappler. So woe be unto you if he thinks you are like Rappler. Okay, next. All right, presidential coverage ban is something that I experienced myself. On a personal level, this was something that that happened to me at first, and then it was expanded to other Rappler reporters. The most recent event of us being banned from a newsworthy event was just last week. It involved our health reporter, Sofia Tomacruz. So the Department of Health was going to launch its tuberculosis information campaign. And of course, Rappler, we want to cover it because it's about health, right? And health is a public issue, tuberculosis is a public issue. But because the president was there, Sofia could not set foot in that launch. And that robbed us of an opportunity to report on tuberculosis and what the government is doing about this health problem. And a few months ago, our provincial correspondent, Bobby Lagsa, who is from Cagayan de Oro, was kicked out of a public college campus because Duterte was going to attend a campaign rally in that school. Bobby Lagsa is a resident of CDO. He's a voter. He's not just a reporter, but he's a concerned citizen. And that place, that campus, was a public place, right? It's actually a state-run college. So, and he was only interviewing people in the streets. He was talking to voters, typical Cagayan de Oro residents about, the elections. And Duterte wasn't even there yet. But the PSG, which stands for Presidential Security Group personnel, basically searched him out, looked for him, and told him to get out. So yun. Okay, next. Sorry. So things to note about the ban. It has expanded from just being about Malacanang. It is now nationwide because it covers anywhere Duterte is. From just one reporter and Maria, that's me and Maria, it has now expanded to cover all Rappler reporters and correspondents. And it covers anything newsworthy as long as Duterte is there. There's also no written basis. It's purely verbal, and there's no time frame. So technically, he can even expand it for who knows how long, and the government would still implement that ban. The onus of this on Rappler reporters is we feel like we're criminals for being journalists because we have to pretend not to be journalists in order to do the work of a journalist. Why? Because we have to disguise ourselves to cover rallies. Our Senate reporter has to wear a hat and shades, and she has to hide from the PSG just so that she can listen to the speeches of the senatorial candidates. Me, I have to find my way, make sure that the PSG don't see my face in order to talk to the president. So you feel like you're deceiving everyone when the work of a journalist is supposed to be transparent, right? You're supposed to be there as the public's representative even, to show government that I'm here to hold you accountable. You have to be worried because I'm here, right? Yeah, we're here to hold you accountable. But to do that, we have to hide. We have to duck and hide to do our jobs. Okay, next. But we're fighting it, all right? Just a few weeks ago, other Rappler reporters and I went to the Supreme Court and we filed a petition asking the Supreme Court to lift the ban. This is our first offensive against the government. Because previously, we've always just been at the receiving end of these legal cases. And I'm just so proud of my company that despite all of our attacks, all of the legal cases against us, they still, they still muster the resources and the willpower to file a case on our behalf. And you don't have a boss like that every day. That it takes a certain kind of boss to stand up against a greater power when they're already themselves on the receiving end of so many attacks. So thank you, Maria, and the rest of Rappler for standing up for us. And we're just praying. We just obviously we're very hopeful that the Supreme Court will side with us. We'll see where we're coming from. That we're just trying to do our jobs. At the end of the day, we're just trying to do our work, and we just want to be able to do that and not have to hide to do our work. Okay, next. Sorry, next slide. Okay, so despite that, we still try to cover the president. So there are lots of other ways. So you might ask me, if you're not able to access Malacanang, how then do you write about Duterte? Well, thankfully, there are still sources who talk to us from Malacanang, and they give us scoops, they give us, the first news about certain things. So we're able to break the news despite the ban. Also, we resort to a lot of other materials like documents. We source documents. We get tips from concerned citizens. And even government people themselves reach out to us. Some of them anonymously because they're scared to be associated with us. But still, diba, people still see the value of being held accountable by rapper, by media. Hi, next. And another thing, if you've seen recently the headlines, more and more we are finding out, and it's becoming more clear that Rappler and the other entities that Duterte has mentioned, like Inquirer, ABS-CBN, were not the only targets. Recently, I'm sure you've heard about the ouster matrix, which is basically like a MS Word-looking piece of paper where you have names of people from various media entities, and they're being linked to propaganda, black propaganda. So Duterte has already said that this information came from a foreign entity, and the police have said that they are going to investigate the people on that list. And despite the fact that the intelligence community has already disowned the information there. So you can see where this is going, right? We have a claim by the president which might not be based on anything, but it's still going to be, there's still going to be follow-up on it by government agencies. All right, so since my time is up, I guess I'll just entertain questions if you have any on my presentation, and I'll end with this note that our democracy lies so much in the little freedoms, the little freedoms we take for granted. Being able to read about government officials, being able to read about the president. These are things that democracies have, and not all countries have that. If you go to China, if you go to other countries where there's no democracy, people only read about propaganda, only read about positive news about their leaders. In our democracy, we actually get to read critical things about the president, about our leaders. And why is this so important? Because that allows us to make up our own minds about government and the way our government is run. Because at the end of the day, that power to decide on our government is in our hands. This May, we're going to be voting for our new Senate, our new congressmen, our mayors, our vice mayors. We cannot vote properly if we do not know these people, if we do not know what they do, even the things they do that might not be to our best interest. So please protect us, protect your media, because we are doing this out of a sense of duty, and we love our work too. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't love to write about things of public interest. So, yun lang. Just help us, and the way you can do that is, number one, call out people who blast the media without any basis. Call them out, like publicly, on your feed, on your Facebook, on Twitter. Challenge their claims, their allegations. Number two, read our stories, read our reports. We exist to be read, and we love it when people give us feedback on our articles, on our video reports. Third, encourage other people to think critically and independently, because an independently thinking society is the basis for any democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pia, for sharing your experience and the Raptor experience, and for giving us a few suggestions on what we can also do to contribute to media freedom. We would now like to request Pia and the rest of our panel members for their first session to please come to the stage, as I introduce our moderator, who will also later introduce the rest of the panel. To moderate our panel discussion, we are honored to have with us a multi-awarded broadcast journalist with years of television and radio experience. She received the 10 Young Outstanding Men Awards for Broadcasting in 2008, or TOYM, as well as the Outstanding Women in the Nation Service Award for Broadcasting in 2013. She was recognized as a young global leader in the 2010s World Economic Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our moderator, Ms. Karen Davila.
Good afternoon, Ateneo. Is everybody from Ateneo? Not everyone. Okay, raise your hand if you're from Ateneo. Is anyone from UP here? Okay, just 5. All right, the other universities that are involved, I know they mentioned them. Can you raise your hand? All right, we have 2 panels this afternoon, and I want to encourage all of you to open your mind and keep it free-flowing, and let's keep it challenging. While it's a given that all of us are for media freedom, I think that's a basic. All of us are for press freedom, that's another basic. Let's also try and ask more questions to also find out if the media has also gone wrong, if we are also accountable in our own way, because this is a worldwide phenomenon of the media going through bigger challenges and the rise of bloggers and vloggers, am I correct? And the building trust actually with bloggers on Facebook has been such an interesting question to me, because it seems that you have more people trusting bloggers who don't vet information over established media that actually goes through a process of vetting information. So I'd like to welcome once again our panelists this morning. I already cried from your speech. That was really touching. And it's important to have a boss who supports you. I agree. Of course, Ambassador Daniel Bruce is joining this panel, and Howard Johnson, BBC correspondent, and Inday Varona, who used to be with ABS-CBN but is now with Reporters Without Borders. Am I correct? Please correct me. I don't have you on the booklet here. Please, ma'am.
I'm basically freelance. I still write for ABS, but I
Okay.
also write for UCAN News.
All right. All right, let's start with this. This is not a new phenomenon. In 1971, no less than former US President Nixon called his press secretary and said, "I want it clearly understood that from now on, no reporter from the Washington Post is ever to be in the White House. Is that clear?" Rod Ziegler said, "Absolutely." Nixon said, "Unless it's a press conference, never in the White House." Edit, it goes on. "That's a total order, and if necessary, I'll fire you." So it's happened before. So I want to ask first, coming from the press secretary, he may argue, what's wrong with that? Doesn't the president have the choice to choose who is in Malacanang or in the White House? I'll start with Pia. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Is that wrong when it's happened to no less? I mean, one of the freest, if not the freest country in the world, the United States, it's been done.
But we should also remember that when Trump tried to do that and CNN fought it, CNN won. So they were able to get Jim Acosta back in the White House. So importantly, it's important to note that the court in that case sided with the media. But also just going to the Philippine side, in our constitution it says, no law shall be passed abridging the freedom of the press. So we are asking the Supreme Court, did what Duterte do, did it violate that? Because obviously for Raptor, it did. Because even if the president has prerogatives, right? He has his own, he has security issues, he has to be protected, he has his own instructions on who he wants to talk to. But does that stand when other freedoms of other people are already being violated by the presidential prerogative? And for us, that shouldn't stand. That even if he has that prerogative, if it already goes against certain rights, then there's a limit to that prerogative.
All right, isn't that the prerogative, frankly, of the palace?
No, the president did it unilaterally. It wasn't even about Rappler's SEC case. It was because he didn't like the reportage of Rappler, and he banned not only one reporter, but practically every reporter from all of his public functions. Now, I remember that the first day that they did that, his then assistant secretary came out and defended that order, and she said, "What's your problem? You can still report on the president. You can watch live stream." But that was crazy because what the president has done has actually stopped Rappler from doing one of the most important things that journalists should do, and that's to ask the tough questions. He dodged Rappler, he hid from Rappler, and I'm so glad that Rappler is fighting back.
All right, is the president any different? Before I go to Howard, is the president any different? Pia and Inday. In 2007, the former first gentleman, Mike Arroyo, was famous for actually filing so many libel cases against journalists. He filed 10 libel cases against 46 media men. This was in 2007. So he essentially tired out reporters, photographers. They ended up going to court, posting bail, very Maria Ressa, so to speak, right? So he's done it before, and as a gift, he dropped all the libel cases during World Press Freedom Day. Isn't that interesting? Duterte might do the same. I'm kidding. But what I'm saying is, Inday, what makes this administration any different? When you've had that administration, in a way, do it before in the Philippines to the media.
Okay, let me just stress, press freedom is not a gift, not from anyone. It's a basic human right. What makes it different? If we are going to hold Duterte to the standards of the Arroyo government, good God, you know. Second, let's put it this way. Maybe Duterte hasn't been filing libel cases, but he's certainly been throwing out threats. And the latest Matrix thing, where I'm included, God knows how they've included
Do you
me
have
there.
security now? No?
No,
Yeah.
I don't have money for it in the first
I
place.
agree,
Okay. It was very clear that it was orchestrated. Sal Panelo immediately said, "Oh, we're not touching you now. But if you keep on doing the things you do," the message was very clear. The military intelligence said, "We don't know exactly what they're talking about." The police initially said, "We don't know either." But the following day, you had the head of the police, the PNP, saying, "But we're still going to investigate them all." For what? For something we had never done.
Okay. Do you remember anything you've written that may have put you in the matrix?
Human rights, human rights,
Yeah.
human rights.
All that. Okay. Now, I'd like to go to Howard first. Lee Kuan Yew he's considered one of the greatest leaders in Asia. And he's quoted as saying, "Too much freedom is not good." That's a quote. He's described the Philippines at one point as, do you want to be like the Philippines? Too much freedom, there's anarchy there. So this is an interesting question. Is there any point to that belief? No less than Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad also quoted that too much freedom is not good. And it could be said as they mean too much press freedom is not good.
Well, this country's had a long and rich tradition of a free press, and it's obviously something that this country is very proud of, that versus other countries in Southeast Asia, it has the free press that perhaps Singapore didn't have. So I think most important of all is we must look back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a standard for progressive governments, and in that it's enshrined that freedom of speech should be allowed. So if you want to be welcomed into the global community and in Southeast Asia to be supported by other governments, I think it's really important that you do back freedom of speech and you don't clamp down on it. So for me, it's all about progressive politics, and I find that this clampdown is very regressive and kind kind of backwards. So you have to stand up for it.
Okay, but Howard, one might argue, look at Singapore today. It's the wealthiest in Southeast Asia. It's a first world country all over the world. And some may argue that for a period of time, it's important not to have a press that's arguing with leadership all the time.
Well, Singapore is progressive as far as its economy is concerned because they have done better as far as corruption. Their judiciary is better than this country, and someone who's just been living here for the last 2 years but been studying the country intensely, you can look back to the Spanish, the Americans, the Marcos family who set the benchmark high for corruption. So when it comes to economic development, the idea of press being curtailed will help to improve that. Well, that's a nonsense. What you really need to tackle is the justice system here. I spent an evening in Manila City Jail and saw one guy who'd been in there for 16 years waiting to just find out whether he's innocent or guilty. So we're talking about people lying next to one another like sardines in really sweltering conditions. These guys don't know whether they're coming or going. And so if you don't have a justice system that's smooth and running, things can get lost in the system. You can obviously see that your economy will not develop quickly. So I think freedom of the press is really important to talk about these issues and bring up uncomfortable things like this. It's difficult for me because when I bring them up, I get slammed and trolled or bashed, as it's called in the Philippines, quite a lot. But it's really important that we talk about these issues.
All right. I want Ambassador Bruce, we had breakfast the other day. Actually, I ate all his food. He didn't eat anything. But then I think it's important for the students in the room to have a role model in terms of just how free and independent a media organization can get. Because the only models, of course, our students would know would be, okay, put it to Rappler, fiercely independent, but online. Then you have the main established networks, which are ABS-CBN, GMA7, owned essentially by big families, big business, even Channel 5. All the students in the room, please pay attention to this. When we say independent, I want you, Ambassador, to talk about the model of the BBC. Just how independent it actually is. Who funds it? Where does it come from? It's perceived to be a government channel.
Sure.
What is the role of government in the BBC?
Okay. Thank you, Karen. And I say this under the guidance and instruction of Howard sitting next to me as a BBC correspondent. But the point you make is exactly right. People often think that the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, is part of the British government or is connected to the British government. The answer is it isn't. The BBC is an independent broadcaster. It has complete editorial independence of the government, of anyone apart from the BBC. It is funded through a rather unique system we have in the United Kingdom, where if you have a television and on that television you watch the BBC, you pay a license fee, and the license fee funds the BBC's activities. But in terms of the content that it broadcasts...
So in other words, for them to understand, in a way, what makes the BBC exist are the people's taxes.
Yes, and that funding model means the BBC does not have to carry adverts, for example. So it's quite a unique funding arrangement. The content that it broadcasts on television, on radio, through its online platforms, all of that is determined by the BBC team. They make the editorial decisions. It's not something in which the government has any hand at all. And indeed, I can say this, having been a government press officer myself many times.
You should share, you were with Tony Blair.
That's right, yes. So I worked in 10 Downing Street when Tony Blair was Prime Minister for a number of years. But our relationship with the BBC was the same as with any other media outlet, and quite rightly, the BBC, alongside all the other newspapers and broadcasters that we dealt with, sought to hold us to account. And can I, just before I hand over to the experts on this, just to pick up on the previous questions and perhaps a wider point. It's not for me to comment on the particular situation here in the Philippines, but you know, we're talking about democracy. What makes up a democracy? You know, in a democracy, citizens have to be able to hold the powerful to account. They have to be able to do that so that they can then decide how they will vote, who they will support. But also, for people that they don't vote for, whether they consider that the behavior of corporations, private individuals, the wealthy, whether that is acceptable or not, whether it conforms to the values of their democracy. And there are lots of institutions that help to ensure that ability for citizens to hold the powerful to account. But right in the middle of that is freedom of the media. And if the media isn't free, if it can't report on everyone and everything that it chooses, then it's impossible for citizens to exercise free judgments. And it's impossible to have a genuine democracy in a society like that.
Thank you very much. Howard, you were going to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this. This is a question I've been asked a lot over my 15-year BBC careers. People ask me, is there an agenda? Like when I was working in the Middle East, are you told how to report on the Holy Land, for instance? And coming here, when I got the job, my boss didn't tell me anything. There was no remit, there was no a demand to cover the drug war or to do anything. So all you need to do to become a BBC journalist is to have, obviously, you know, a degree, a passion for journalism and freedom of speech. I have a journalism qualification as well, and a long love of watching documentaries and news and current affairs. That's what gives me the right to be able to talk about subject matters like the war on drugs. And so when I first came to the country, I went straight to Tondo and started speaking to people around there. And what really set my mind on how to cover this story was meeting one lady who told me that her son was a marijuana smoker. And I'll keep it short, but what happened was, she alleges on the day that her son was killed, that the police went to his house and the funeral parlor were already waiting before he was killed. Then there was a bag of marijuana and a gun placed next to the body of the son. And the reason, you know, where I realized that this was morally wrong was when she said to me, every day I think about how he invited me for dinner that week, but I was so busy, you know, on the jeep, waiting for the jeepney, traveling to work. I worked 7 days and I couldn't have dinner with him. He invited me, and for every day since he died, I think about that memory that he invited me and I didn't see him that last time. And I saw her again at the Kiam de los Santos funeral, walking alone, being there just to try and feel that she had someone who was supporting her. And for me, it just made me realize that, you know, this job is about giving a voice to the voiceless. It's very important that someone stands up for these people who live in a community where, you know, she was, it sounds like it, you know, this was an extrajudicial killing by the sounds of what she says. So that's how the BBC operates. We don't have an agenda. My boss didn't tell me how to cover this. You just, you know, guided by my education. But lastly, the point is that, you know, these new blogs and, you know, websites where they don't have that standard, you know, the fact that you've got a degree and you have an education in media law and what have you, that helps you to be a better journalist, to make sure that you cover all angles of the story.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say I'm going to open the floor for the open forum soon. Both our ambassadors want that you're all engaged. So the one wants to ask the question, please stand. There are microphones, I think 2 or 3 out there. Just go and stand and I'll call you in a bit. Okay? Have the courage to do it, the boldness and the courage. Don't feel shy. Okay. CNN's Christian Amanpour, Inday, and Pia defined reporting in a way, I mean, I found this quite liberating because the question of objectivity has been raised with media people for so long. In fact, in the Philippines, you're either labeled as Dutertard or Adilawan, okay? And she said something that I found to be freeing is, I don't hope to be neutral, I hope to be truthful. And when you are truthful, you're not neutral, because the truth is on one side. So the question, Pia, when you report and Inday, what guide do you follow?
If it's a straight news story, it's the facts of the incident or of the report. And obviously, when it comes to balancing the article, you get both sides of the story. So that's always in our protocol. Like we always, number one, check how many sources are you using for the story. Number two, did you get the other side? Did you do your best to get the other side? And did you stick to the facts? You didn't misinterpret any data. So those guidelines are pretty straightforward because they have to do with information and just the basic effort of trying to get the other side.
But how do you contextualize? Because to put in context, a major event is important for the readers to understand the weight, the gravity of a particular story.
So after we report the facts, then we put in the analysis, which is, for example, to say that what Duterte said is false because yada yada yada. This is the legal basis, or he didn't have any basis for saying this. And then we also say, for example, we cite related reports that show the context of what he said. Like the fact that even if Duterte said this, it was already rebutted by an expert. So we don't just report as is, but to give the complete picture, you also have to point out if it was wrong, if it was inaccurate, if it was misleading, if it was just something electioneering related, or he's obviously saying this because he has this agenda, this advocacy. So you always add that color also.
So for the record, would you consider Rappler at this point anti-government?
No, definitely not. We are not anti-government. We are pro-truth. And the government, if it stands for the truth, we stand for that as well. Because, diba, you ideally would want your government to also stand for the facts, to stand for what is true, to stand for democratic values. So we will get along if you, diba, if we're all on the same page, then we're not pro or anti any entity, but what we are very much biased for, quote unquote, is
or
the
against,
truth.
For the truth.
Is for
yes.
the truth. And we're against the lies.
Okay, Inday, when you said you're freelance, you still write for ABS-CBN.
Okay. When we say we have a duty to the truth, what is called on us is fairness. Fairness is different from neutrality. I've always said this. Journalists are not stenographers. Usually they say, just be objective, just say what he says. That's exactly what we're there for, to point out which stuff are not true and which stuff are true, okay? So what happens? We've become a little bit in a rush all the time. So we have to break first, and so the president and other leaders know this and take advantage of that. So they will just throw lie after lie after lie because they know they've got a captive audience. We have no choice but to quote them. But I think journalists have started doing this. They don't wait for this afternoon. They no longer wait for tomorrow. Right there and then, you should point out the contradictions in what news sources say. And I think that's what we should be doing.
Okay, I think for the students, it's important to get what Inday said. Journalists are not stenographers. Because there seems to be a perception that, okay, he said this, she said that, and that's the end of it. That's the story. That does not make a story. So are journalists, Inday, allowed to interpret a story, to put it in a context wherein it makes a person, a reader, understand?
Yes, we are allowed to interpret by giving out different sets of facts to situate a story in a context. We're not allowed to interpret just by throwing our opinions out there, which of course the Manila Times did, But we are, we've got very many facts that could support the story. So when one person says this, and we know that there's a certain fact that can also contradict his argument, we put it there. We don't call people liars in news stories, but we do, point out untruths in news stories.
All right, questions from the floor. Let's start with a student. Okay, give her a hand. You know, I always say that because the first student who asks, it takes a lot of courage for the first one to like open the floor. Your name and
So I think that recently trust in the media has been very low, and sometimes I think we can say that it's become a partisan issue. So how do journalists truly show that they are for fairness and balance in the news?
that's a great question because if we're doing such a great job, Howard, Inday, and Pia, why is media trust low? I mean, I open Facebook and everybody hates me, right? So I wonder, am I doing my job right? My God, I do the Manny Pacquiao interview and suddenly I mocked him, insulted him. You get the point? Why is media trust low? What's happened to? Howard, I'll start with you. Have we failed? Has media failed?
No, it's just that the internet came around and that changed everything. I mean, social media has changed how we think. Someone was saying just the other day, there's two realities now. There's almost like the avatar world, which is online, and then there's the real world. So, and people are believing this new world that they spend hours staring at. If you are from the old guard, like me, now suddenly I feel old, which is weird because I always thought I was quite young, but now I'm the old guard now because I grew up, with 4 TV channels in the UK. That's extraordinary now to think that in the old days, the BBC pretty much controlled how people thought, and they had a great responsibility to do just that. So that meant that the reporting did have to be fair and balanced. But now there isn't the need for that. There's a plethora of channels and platforms, and where you can find your niche, feeling or your interest. So if you're particularly against immigrants, you can find people who are like-minded, and now you can cluster together and start to share these kind of views. So the media have been attacked because for a long time, I sort of call it, this is quite unfair, but I call it the rise of the idiots. Basically where...
Oh my God.
Where, because they now have a platform, they are sort of trying to attack the old guard, who obviously were the ones who did better at school, perhaps, and then ended up getting the good job. And now it's a way of, these people who harbor racist views, for instance, now can attack people who, in the past were unapproachable. I mean, in the BBC, it was very difficult to troll someone because you'd have to personally go to television centre headquarters to... I mean, some of my colleagues received, horrible stuff in the mail, quite a lot. So, that was the old way. But now you can just do it at a touch of a button.
All right, that's very good. Okay, Ambassador, please, sir.
Just a brief postscript to what Howard said. I think, citizens have always been critical of the media. They've always had a point of view on the work of journalists, particularly where they disagreed with it. But go back not so many years ago, and that disagreement was articulated at home, or maybe a letter, or perhaps you might go to television centre. Whereas now, and your example is a good example of this, Karen, in a matter of seconds, a flick of a switch, a quick tweet, and your opinion is out there for millions of people to see. So I think, I'm not sure that people are more critical of the media nowadays, but I think, this is a personal view, the criticisms are much easier to share, with millions of people. As Howard said, that can lead to people forming their own organized groups as well.
There's a bandwagon effect too now. That's what happens with social media. But locally, sir, just give me a minute. Locally, Inday and Pia, quickly, I mean, has the local media also failed? I mean, ABS, Rappler, Inquirer, Star, GMA, holistically, have we also isolated? I mean, let's say, a group of people that has led to this division in the Philippines of just red and yellow? Have we also failed in our reportage? Holistically, this is not meant to be like per paper or not that.
Corruption has always been an issue in any industry, right? There are corrupt journalists. We can't deny that. There are people who accept money to write stories. But by and large, I really don't see it as the majority. And secondly, I think that while there have been challenges in coping with internet, like, you know, the need to break something right away. Obviously, there will be mistakes there. There have been inaccurate reports published. But I think by and large, the one major reason why people have such low trust in media is because we have a president who is, number one, very, very popular, and number two, doesn't have any limits to what kind of threats and insinuations, allegations he will have on reporters, on media. Whether or not he has a basis for saying these claims, the fact that he says it, it gets published, it gets written about, and it also emboldens other people who have a beef against media and makes them more rabid. And then you also can't discount the fact that there was a systematic attack on the credibility of journalists. We had Mocha Uson using the word prostitutes like so many times in her account. It became viral. I think it became the word of the year at some point, right? So I think these factors, this is inevitable why people have such low trust in the media.
Yeah, very briefly, it was Duterte who started the attacks. Mocha, of course, took it further. But he hadn't even sat in Malacanang yet when Duterte was already attacking media. And he laid down the foundation of all the presidents, and we've suffered under other presidents. It is only Duterte who has actually laid down the justification for killing journalists. When he said that, you know, if you're dead, that's probably, if, you know, somebody kills you, that's probably because you've done something wrong.
He said if you're, because there are corrupt journalists.
Because there are corrupt journalists, and so it's not
I think
going
during
to
the
them.
campaign.
And then it went on and on, you know, but it has never ever stopped. So it's been systematic, as Pia said. But I think recently, because I do check, with many bots and all those stuff taken out of the internet, what I see now is that there are less attacks. What I see now are there are greater numbers of those crazy praise Duterte, the best president of the universe kind of stories, but less attacks, because I think people have started to realize that it's not helping.
All right. Our student in stripes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark, a graduate student from UP Diliman, MA Journalism.
Okay.
I would like to briefly share about, and also solicit from the panel, the reactions on the cyber attacks on alternative media organizations, because I wrote for bulatlat.com and pinoyweekly.org. So recently, starting last December, our websites, along with Alter Media, Ibon Foundation, and Kodao Productions were shut down. And through digital forensic investigations, we found out that there are 2 IT companies who linked to these attacks. So for the benefit of our audience, I would like to ask, for example, Ms. Inday, who also
Wait, so you're
very
shut
well
down?
known.
Are you
Yes,
shut down?
ma'am. We were shut down
What is the
in
name?
December.
Bulat-
Bulatlat.com and
Okay.
pinoyweekly.org and other alternative
Okay,
media
yeah.
outfits. So, the attacks were linked to 2 companies. We already filed cases through the help of the National Union of People's Lawyers. And the attacks are continuous. Not just last December, but until last week, meron pa ring there are still websites being shut down. So,
I
it's
think
also important rin po na sana we can give some reaction from these incidents of shutdowns by...
Okay, I'll start with Inday, then Howard and Pia.
I'm also glad that the Alter Media Network, it's not just Alter Media, but the Ibon,
Yeah.
the NBL, inaatake, DDoS, you know, like I think one attack is equivalent to half a year's traffic, you know. So obviously those websites are going down periodically, no matter how much help they have, you know, from foreign friends. Okay, it's like Rappler in a very different way. What they're trying to do is not just denial of access, for our audience, for the audience of Altermedia, and denial of access for the journalists of Altermedia because they can't even get into the website. But more important, I think, an ultimate goal, like Rappler also, is denial of operations because they need media silence. And alternative media has been very loud in areas where maybe the more mainstream outfits don't really go because these are in the countrysides, these are in the rural areas.
I can just quickly weigh in and say it wasn't about shutdown, but when I did a documentary last year about democracy in this country, in 1 month I received more than 520 messages. The patterns of language was the same: prostitute, yellow, biased. You know, it was like, it was all endless stuff, gifs of Trump saying you're fake news, and then peppered in there were a few threats of violence. And then I got loads of weird emails around that time. And, you know, when I looked at it, I realized that there was a pattern there. It was orchestrated. I don't know who was doing it, but it was very curious. And yeah, I think there's obviously someone out there who's caroling the trolls and the troops to attack.
Okay, I'll let Pia answer the next one. The lady here.
So, do you see a parallelism between Marcos's and Duterte's?
Wait, your name and school.
Mary John from De La Salle University.
Oh, hello.
I belong here.
You're alone?
I don't belong here.
From La Salle? Anyone from La Salle? Oh, there are. You have you have greenies over there. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
So Marcos's proclamation 1081 led to the issuance of a few letters. The first one being the taking over of certain news outlets, namely, and the abolishment of 8 newspapers written in English, and 18 of those, or I think 21 of those, were written in Filipino, alongside radio stations. So do you think that it is also Duterte's strategy to take control and slowly introduce a type of government he wants, so that information, especially to the people within grassroots level, would be limited?
All right, that's a great question. I'll let Pia start that. I won't have the UK ambassador answer that. Okay, no. Are they different? Because Duterte makes threats, but he hasn't shut anyone down. I mean, who knows in ABS, but nothing shut down. So they can make that argument versus her question of Marcos actually did it.
So we can see that there are different ways that dictators or dictator-like leaders try to silence the media. And the Marcos way was very explicit, right? Shut down, take over media organizations, even kill journalists. In this time, we're seeing a different playbook. It's similar in that the end goal is the same: silence, control the messaging, but the manner is different. And some people would even say this is more insidious because it's a gray area. People can easily say, can dismiss it now. Oh, it's not everyone, nothing's really closed, they're still operating, but the fear is still there. And I think Duterte knows that he doesn't even need to shut down anyone to control the messaging. Even just planting the seed of fear, he knows that that's enough to control the messaging. And at the same time, if you notice, he's dividing and conquering. He's not like shutting everyone down, but he's picking and choosing a few people, making them as examples so that other entities will start having this voice in their heads that if I write this story the way it's supposed to be written, like critical, what happened to Rappler might happen to me, what happened to Verifiles might happen to me, or what Duterte is saying about PCIJ might be said about me.
So it becomes sort of so inconvenient to the point you ask yourself, do I really want to go through that again? Then it silences you. Inday, that's a good question, Marcos and now.
Yeah, if there is fear, it's because it's not just Duterte's words that we have to face, okay? And it's not just media. Whatever is happening to media, by the way, is happening to other sectors of society. And this is very, very clear in the time of Duterte. So we've got the strangely named Presidential Task Force for Media Safety actually going with military officials to Europe, accusing journalist organizations of practically being terrorists. And doing it over and over again here. We've got the same military officials here doing the same. And it's not just journalists that they're accusing, it's practically any critical group there, including, for God's sake, the Special Rapporteur, UN Special Rapporteur. So, paulit-ulit, and then they have these laws or proposed laws lined up, where if the students, you don't know this, it goes like this. Once they pass the draconian anti-terror bill, any media organization or journalist who interviews anyone that the government tags as a terrorist becomes an accessory to terrorism. And if we've seen how this government has acted, putting 600 names that's been thrown out of court already as terrorists, then we know that the danger is real.
All right. I think I can do 2 more questions. I mean, just let me know. Sir?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Riel Gutierrez, Managing Editor of Ateneo Matanglawin. So we've been discussing a lot of external factors, external engagements of media and the government, but I would just like to deviate a little bit, but deal more with the company and the media outlet. So is there a certain line between the interests of the companies as businesses, which also have media branches such as ABS-CBN, GMA, etc., that are not just news companies but media companies as well? In pursuit of the media to protect the truth and democracy, how do you keep the integrity of journalism despite the business factor? If so, how will you as journalists deal with that?
All right, that's a good question. I mean, ideally I could answer it, but I'll let Inday answer it. You'll add. Well, I'd just like to say, well, this is something quite interesting. So I've been a journalist for 25 years. I've been with ABS for 19 years. When I was with GMA7, none of you were born, so that's the hard part. But you know what I learned when Maria Ressa took over as our senior vice president? I forgot the years. Okay, but you did. So 2005? So 2005, she became our senior vice president for news. And she introduced something that we found in the beginning it was so uncomfortable, but in the end, it was the right thing to do, because all over the world, media entities, except for the BBC, are owned by big corporations. Don't think none of them are. ABC is owned by Disney, if I'm correct, or GE. I mean, am I right, Maria? I mean, you cannot exist in the terms of the capital you need not to have big business run you unless you're the BBC. So our owners then owned Meralco, which is a power distribution company for the foreigners in the room. And every time there was a story on Meralco then, Maria would say, just report it the way it is, just report it the way it is. Even if it's tough, just do it. And at the end of the report, the anchor would say this line: Meralco is a subsidiary or a sister company of ABS-CBN. So in the beginning, it was a bit strange, because it was almost like, you know, the Filipino culture, you were distancing yourself from, and the Lopezes had owned a lot of companies, and it would happen to every story. But there's a reason for that. You were declaring openly to the viewer, take it or leave it, it's a sister company, but we are reporting independently, but declaring to you it's a sister company. So that's one. There's also, I mean, a saying worldwide of, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And I don't want to be idealistic in this regard. I want to be truthful. ABS-CBN is 4,000 employees, or 5,000, Maria. So it stands its ground. The threats of our franchise closing, I mean, in every speech, criticizing our chairman, Eugenio Lopez. I mean, the Lopezes have had such a deep history with democracy and reopening after martial law. So it's a company with grit and stamina to see it through, but also with a core interest that you have to remember. There are 5,000 employees in ABS-CBN now. So I think every day as a newsman, as a commentator, as a host, I do Head Start every morning. I strive to be independent and truthful, but I am realistic as well. So that's the best way I can tell you and describe at least where I stand.
In all my decades in journalism, I've always worked for companies where the owners had business or political interest or both, you know. And probably most journalists in the Philippines do. But we slug it out every day. You know, we try to keep it as honest as possible. If you know your ethics, if you know your professional standards, you will fight it out every day in the newsroom. There are some days when we lose. Most of the days we do win when we fight for the stories that mean dear to us. No? So it's never a picnic, but it's a given, and I don't think that should scare anybody who wants to be a journalist. We fight it out.
Is that all right? Okay, the next question. I think this is the last for this panel.
Good evening, I'm Franz Regal. I'm from the Guidon SM from Ateneo. And my question is, with the rise of like all these civilian journalists and these vloggers like Mocha Usan, for example, my understanding is that the reason why citizens dig her so much is because she relays the news, fake news, but news nonetheless, in a manner that they understand. Yeah. So my question's rather normative. How should we approach these people who like dig her news, or like, how do we do it in such a way that we don't feed the trolls? Because it's one thing to call out these people, but it's really another thing to make them understand what they're being called out for, or like the gravity of what they're doing is.
Yeah, but can you repeat the exact question you want them to answer?
So how do we call out these people who say false things about the media, or usually we just refer them to umbrella trolls?
Okay. Pia, why don't you start with that? Because it's also degrading when we actually, you know, as a whole think that everybody are bots. They're actually not. When I look at some of the accounts that bash, they're real people who just joined the bandwagon because they believe the attacks to be true against journalists. So, I mean, I can imagine how frustrated you are when they say, Pia Ranada, dapat makulong ka na kasama ni Maria Ressa, without even knowing for sure. None of them's read the SEC case. None of them knows the situation of Rappler.
Well, to answer your question,
Yeah.
number one would be, don't stoop to their language. Never
To
curse
their
at
language.
them. Yeah, because we know that
Agree.
a lot of the trolls use very emotionally laden curse words, ad hominem attacks. So never go to that level. Secondly, question them. Return their claim to them. Like if they say Rappler's Bayaranon or EBCBN is biased, ask them for proof. Where are the links? What are the stories you're talking about? What specific instance was a reporter from Rappler or EBCBN or Inquirer biased? And third, if there's already a specific instance that they're claiming, and then look to the source of the article itself and think, you know, look at the article, read it, and think independently, is this really a biased article? Is it biased just because it is negative? Because a lot of people think that just because an article is unflattering on a government official, it is already a biased article. That's not the case, because there are truths that are ugly. And we as journalists, we don't have the responsibility to make that truth pretty for you because you are insulted by it or you feel like you're violated by it. We report the truth, ugly or not, pretty or ugly, right? So, ganun yun, like, don't buy into their arguments that just because negative, the article is negative, it's already black propaganda, it's already untrue, it's already, negative, not independent journalism. It's actually when we point out the bad things, the negative things, the wrongdoing, that we are really doing our job. Because the media isn't here to write positive stories. We're not press, we're not public relations arms of the government.
But
We're,
then I want to
Diba?
cut you on that, and I
Okay,
want you
okay.
to explain.
Okay.
That's the argument of the netizens. You always report, not you personally, meaning the media always reports everything bad against President Duterte. Why can't you report something good? And if we are, as you say, we cover all, shouldn't we report good things too?
Number one, that's a fallacy. We also report the good things. Whenever a law is signed, whenever a Duterte visits calamity victims, which for some people is good, we report on that because it's public interest. We don't report on it because it's good. We report on it because it's public interest. Number two, we don't have to even report the good things. It's really not in our, it's not in our ethics that media should report good things. No, we report public interest, issues that will affect the public, and we don't differentiate if that is good or bad.
All right, Inday, just
we as journalists should try to distinguish between those who are just out to openly attack us and those who are genuinely confused. Those who are confused, we do have an obligation to answer. We do have a duty to explain where our stories are coming from, maybe the processes that we use there. I mean, and we try to do this as often as we can without being bogged down into hours and hours and hours of social media.
So we should engage.
Yes, we should. No.
Okay.
When a person is abusive, just block it. Okay?
Just block.
Yeah, but we can see who is actually seeking for additional information, and these people we should engage. Now, but the long-term solution to that is media literacy. And when we say trolls, I said this. I think this is fully manufactured noise also, because I worked with citizen journalism in ABS for 3 years, and I tell you, high school students are eager to learn about how to tell the news properly, how to share information about their lives properly. And it's totally false that we are being told right now that citizens don't care about us. They do. They're just being swamped by noisier voices that are systematically placed out there.
Okay, Ambassador.
Just very briefly, because I'm conscious that time is running out, but
Yes,
just to
yes.
pick up on that point,
Yeah.
from my journalism, properly researched articles, the sorts of things we've been discussing this afternoon.
Yes.
And one private individual at home, in their bedroom, on their laptop, spitting out hatred, insults, or lies. There's a world of difference between those two things. But the fact is, at the moment, the landscape is confusing. You know, the multiplicity of channels and sources and private accounts and bots, it's difficult to work out the difference. So I think Indai's point is absolutely right, and it's one of the things we're seeking to address in the campaign. It's this question of media literacy, and that's not patronizing anyone. People are intelligent, they can make their own judgments, but we are at a point in our history, in the midst of this great information revolution, where the landscape is very, very confused, and it requires concerted effort to try to navigate our way through that. And I hope in a small way, hopefully a meaningful way, the campaign that we're taking forward with our Canadian partners can help us do that.
All right, we have to wrap up, but very briefly, Howard, maybe you can share with her, being a BBC correspondent, do you engage? Do you take the time to, I mean, I don't know if you're trolled, or is there a BBC rule? Don't engage, just leave them be.
There's no rule, but I don't feed the trolls. I'm not interested in it. So what is, in a way, they're actually, that's what they want you to do, is waste your time replying to them, and you'll never resolve, you know, their beef with you. So it's pointless. But what I did do is I took all of those threats and what have you, and I wrote about them and did a radio piece. So I took it from the digital world back into the 70s and did a radio piece. But just very quick one is, you know, there are efforts being made to tackle, you know, people who are, you know, posting stuff. Obviously, Rappler and AFP and Verifiles, third-party fact checkers. And an interesting point is that a friend of mine who works in Facebook in Singapore told me that I queried why the wording, when it's a false news story, initially it used to have a stronger wording that popped up to warn readers, oh, this is false news. But Facebook said that the very act of people seeing that made them share it more. So they've changed the way it now, the wording is now a little bit softer, and they've seen that that means that they're not sharing it as much. So, I mean, it's just a crazy world we're living in now.
All right, can you give our first panelists, our first group of panelists a hand? Pia, Inday, Howard, Ambassador Bruce, thank you. Are we gonna go on intermission quickly? No, straight to the next.
We'll just quickly award the tokens of appreciation to our guests. So we'd like to request Pia to remain on stage, Inday, Howard, and also our Ateneo officials and the ambassadors to provide our tokens of, to present rather, our tokens of appreciation. So from Ateneo de Manila, we'd like to call on Father Jose Villarin, Attorney Jimmy Holefeña, and Dr. Fernando Aldaba to present the tokens from Ateneo de Manila. Round of applause, please. Now we'd like to call on His Excellency John Holmes, as well as His Excellency Daniel Prus, to present the tokens of appreciation from the British Embassy and the Canadian Embassy. We'll have a group photo with everyone. So we'd like everyone to remain on stage for one group photo. All of our panelists, as well as our officials who presented our tokens of appreciation. We'd also like to request Ambassador Daniel Prus to join the photo. Yes, and Karen Davila, please. Thank you. Okay, a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. So we certainly learned a lot from that very rich discussion for the first part. We look forward to the second part of our forum. As you know, some of our audience had to leave, so we request the rest of the audience to please come down a bit more closer to the stage, please. Yes? It just gives us more of a, well, homey feeling to have all of you down here with us. So the second half of this forum will now look into questions around media ethics, media regulation, and therefore media responsibility. Our speaker for this part is a senior multi-platform journalist of ABS-CBN. She is responsible for researching, gathering information, and writing news for ABS-CBN's television, social media, radio, and news websites. Given her extensive background, our speaker has proven adept in doing live reports, mobile journalism, and video editing. Ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker, Ms. Jackie Manabat.
Hello everyone, I'm Jackie Manabat. Wow, that was a tough act to follow. I hope I will do justice with this presentation. I'll be presenting social media and journalism. I was told I was going to discuss it to college students, so I'll be talking to you through GIFs, if you know GIFs, and memes. If you can't relate, please ask your seatmates. So, I promise to make this discussion quick, fun, I hope, and informative and interactive. All right, so that's me. Next slide, please. Okay, so I was told, you know, millennials are introducing themselves as hashtags or their Twitter handle, so that's me, at Jackie Manabat. All right, so that's the next slide. Okay, so for the third year in a row, the Philippines emerged as the country that spent the most time on social media. That's according to a report by We Are Social and Social Media Management Hootsuite. So, an average Filipino social media user spends almost 4 hours on different platforms daily, followed by the Brazilians and the Indonesians. Next slide, please. One more. All right. So Facebook continues to dominate the internet as the top social media platform with over 2 billion users. You know, here in the Philippines, we use Facebook extensively. So whenever I post something on Facebook, sometimes I use the Filipino language. That's how we reach to the masses. That's how we reach to the 80% of social media users here in the Philippines. So that's important to using the Filipino language in social media. Next slide. And Twitter is the 21st century newspaper. So when we, the moment we open our eyes in the morning, we use Twitter. And we're bombarded with this information. Oh, wow. It's fun. You're enjoying the GIFs. All right, next slide. All right, so, you know, you know this meme? Yeah, ain't nobody got time for that. So that's what's happening now with us journalists. You know, ever since Facebook and Twitter emerged as key tools for news, journalists and newsrooms have performed a high-wire act. Yeah, they need to use social media to engage their audience, write for broadcast journalism platforms, post on Twitter, on Facebook, write for radio. Super dami, di ba? But the pay stays the same. Yeah, so we need to use the social media and then, you know, in new inventive ways, while, this is important, while also maintaining ethical standards. You know, achieving that balance has been rocky for many reporters, and several have faced serious consequences or bashing. Oh, Ms. Karen Davila would be very familiar with this, with that Manny Pacquiao interview, you know, for speaking their minds in 140 characters or less. Okay, so why do we journalists need to use the social media? You know, one of the key reasons why journalists use social media is to interact with their audience. In fact, social media are perceived to have helped journalists with our relationship with the audience. You know, social platforms are a key entry point, but that's where our engagement efforts begin, not where they end. And we want to get to know our audiences and keep them over time. You know, one of the, not yet, sorry. You know, one of the most rewarding and at times most humbling part of transitioning to the digital storytelling, in my opinion and in my experiences, the audience-driven storytelling for me has been learning how to solicit feedback and gather data from the audience that helps me understand what's actually working for them and what isn't. Whenever I do Facebook Live on, for example, the airport, I'm reporting on the surge of the travelers. I do it Facebook Live and I get comments live, and then that's where I see the real problem and not just the sound bites from my sources. So that's important too. And you know, we're serious journalists who understand audiences and analytics, but what we see is a plethora of story ideas and people in all of that data. So when I speak at events like this, I'm usually making the case for the journalistic aspects of audience engagement. So let's think beyond all those vanity metrics, you know, of the likes, the number of shares. Let's make it or invest in more meaningful engagement that involves people directly into journalism, engagement that serve communities, engagement that is measured in user contributions that add up to real stories, and engagement that spurs change. You know, the smartest person in the room is the room itself, the audience, because the audience know more than anyone else. So if you know, journalists, even campus journalists, tap into that audience's knowledge, that's a huge resource. Okay, so this I recorded April 23, 2019, almost midnight, when the Luzon quake happened. I'm using the trends map, so I'm checking the hashtags and the users. One more click, please. So there, I recorded this, so that's, you can see the trending hashtags. There's hashtag BBMA Stop Social. I think it's the BTS. Do you know the BTS? Yeah. So there are users there. A lot of BTS hashtags over Luzon quake. Why? It worries me. So there's Avengers, Luzon. Why? I don't know. At CNN Philippines, at ABS-CBN News, show business. So that just goes to show the general sentiment of the people. Ang showbiz pala natin, no? The entertainment in our department, especially in ABS, even gets the more clicks than the news. So we have to be more inventive and creative. Okay, so next is, this I recorded last night, almost midnight, so it's 2 weeks before elections. I'm using the Crowd Tangle app, April 28th. So you can see here the senatorial candidates, the most active last night, party list groups, election news. This is a treasure trove of information. There are a lot of ABS-CBN news, of course, Facebook, Twitter. So what they did here is listed the pages of the party list and the senators, so they can monitor it. All right. Do you know who has the most interactions on Facebook? It's Doc Willie Ong. That's last night. And with, yes, that's on Facebook. Yes, a lot of Doc Willie Ong interactions. And with Twitter, we have Pilo Hilbay last night, maybe because of the debate. Surprising, no? Okay, next slide, please. Here are the challenges. So, verification, proper credits, giving the proper credits and putting context, especially on the tweets of our sources. So that's a cat, a driving cat, and that says, I'm serious, my cat stole my car, not joking. So, you know, journalists wouldn't have just to retweet it like that. We have to verify if the cat is really driving. You have to put context on that. So that's the journalist's job and responsibility, all right? Social media etiquette. Okay, for this part, I want you to raise your hands if you agree, okay, or disagree. Okay, I'll just ask you. Social media etiquette, because you know, I think social media policy is not really relevant to, nowadays. Yeah. Social media policy gets outdated quickly. So what we need to understand is we just have to set some guidelines that we're using in the, in ethics, using in the journalism that we're doing right now. So next slide, please. Okay, so the notion that journalists should only spit out facts and headlines has been replaced by the idea that it's acceptable to have a point of view and show some personality. Who here agrees that a journalist should express opinions? Raise your hands. Can I show raise of hands? Oh, really? That's half of the room. Who disagrees? Who disagrees? Hey, just, you know, actually put it out there. Hey, lady in red, can I ask you, why do you disagree that journalists shouldn't? Come on, just very, very brief. Let's make this interactive. Since social media is all about interaction. Lady in red, can you please stand in the mic, please? Why do you disagree?
Hello, okay.
Please introduce yourself and what school?
I'm Andy from Ateneo. I don't think that journalists should say their personal biases, because that's why people sometimes view journalists or certain news outlets as biased. So in order to avoid that, I think it's safer and less of an issue if they don't.
Well, good point. Can I get I think you raised your hand when I said who agrees. Can I get you, please? You wearing the green shirt, yeah. Kayo po. Okay, who agreed? Bakit nawala? How come? All right, anyway, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is from Nikita Patel of CNN Social Media Product Manager. Basically, she's saying that it's okay for a journalist to tweet as long as it's not controversial. But the debatable part here is how controversial is controversial? Right. Okay, taking sides. One more click. Okay, our journalist should. For those who cannot relate, let's just please explain it to them briefly. Okay, for a journalist should be especially mindful of appearing to take sides on issues that your newsroom is seeking to cover objectively. So, who here? Okay, this is this is a show from GMA, from the other channel, Karen. So, generated a lot of memes. So, who here agrees that journalists should take sides or partisan views? Who here agrees? Wow, or partisan agrees to take sides. Who here disagrees? Okay, I see a lone soul there who agreed. Can I ask your opinion, please, very briefly?
Hi, coming from the alternative media, we side with the oppressed and marginalized.
Oh, witty.
Yeah. Actually, we write stories not usually covered by the dominant or mainstream media.
Mm-hmm. All right.
While the dominant media usually takes the side or highlights the side of the government and other policymakers, the alternative press balances that the media through taking the side of the oppressed and marginalized by highlighting their struggles for a just and humane society.
Oh, thank you. That's a good point. You know, for me, it's journalists should avoid joining private and secret groups on Facebook and other platforms that may have partisan orientation. That's secret groups. Yeah, there are such things. Okay, next slide, please. That's just my opinion. Okay, should we post complaints? You know, on that same note, I think journalists should be discouraged from making customer service complaints on social media. While, you know, journalists may believe that we have a legitimate gripe, will most likely be given special consideration because, you know, there's a reporter, an editor, we might write something about it. So, yeah, post complaints. Next slide, please. Okay, should we engage trolls, bashers, critics? Should we engage? Who agrees? Why? Who disagrees? Oh, it's a lot in the room. All right. Next slide. Okay, this is debatable. Should we delete tweets? Our tweets. Sorry, journalist tweets. Should we delete tweets? Delete tweets, sorry. Agree? Delete tweets if we made a mistake, yeah. Agree? But explain. That's right, Ms. Inday. You know, sometimes I wish Twitter had a correction tool. So mistakes wouldn't go viral, you know. But if it's a bad link or a typo, you can go ahead. You just send out a correction. Next. So here's Anthony DeRosa of Reuters, social media. And he said the best way to handle a bad tweet with bad information is to leave it and post a follow-up tweet with a correction. Next. Okay, liking posts. Would you like journalists liking posts? Agree? Yeah. Disagree? Hey, we're making it interactive. Okay, nobody wants to answer. Well, we may think that it's our Facebook page, it's our Twitter feed, Instagram, and Snapchat, or other social media accounts or private zones separate from our role as journalists or reporters. But in fact, everything we post or like online is to some degree public. and everything we do in public is likely to be associated with our news organization. So it's still up to you if you want to like a tweet, like a poster. All right, 5 minutes, okay. Next. Public photo. Okay. How, this is actually debatable. Should we, there are some organizations, I admit, there are some organizations that use photos as their own, right? Do you agree that photos posted in social media are public or not? Agree? Do you think that photos in social media are public? Yeah, I can use it. Who disagrees? Yeah, oh, a lot in the room. Okay. Well, we have to exercise caution when sharing scoops or provocative stories from other organizations. Us journalists, we really have to do that extra mile of getting their permission. So, yeah. Next. Okay, here are some digital do's for journalists and campus journalists alike. Okay. Treat others the way you want to be treated. This sounds pretty basic. Even journalists should do this. Even those who are not journalists should do this. It's probably the one piece of digital etiquette advice that is broken the most. Next. Hey, next. All right, be vigilant. Well, if you saw something happen in real life where someone could be harmed, you'd call for help, right? Yeah. So if you see something online that may be harmful to someone else, report it to the site's authorities. It's our responsibility to do that. If you see something harmful, you report it. If you see someone posing as someone, you should also report it. Next. Here are some digital zones. Anyone know this guy? Okay, don't say anything online you wouldn't say to someone's face. An online comment can be even more hurtful than a face-to-face insult, because once something is written, the person can read it over and over again. And when we journalists receive these kinds of hurtful messages, hey guys, we're still humans. Umiiyak pa rin kami sa gabi when we receive these messages. And sometimes we find it easier to reply with negative comments when the person is not right in front of you, and you can hide behind your computer or smartphone. Don't be tempted. You think twice about what you're gonna say before you post or send it, and ask yourself, would I say this to someone if they were standing in front of me? Yeah. Next. Okay, don't believe everything you read. Not everything online is true. In fact, there's a lot online that's not true. Before believing or sharing, you dig deeper. I think as journalists or campus journalists, it is also our responsibility to share the truth. Search for facts. Just because it's written online doesn't mean it's true. Okay. Okay, my forever. Don't post anything that you don't want to last forever. Before you say or post anything online, you ask yourself, am I okay if this is never deleted? Once something is out there online, it is likely it's out there for good. So sa internet, may forever. Yung mga hindi pa nakakahanap ng forever here. Right. Before posting, and this is I think my last slide. Before posting, I want you to ask yourself this. Is this something, wait, back. No, like later. Okay. Yeah. Okay, before posting, this is from Maggie Haberman of the New York Times Reporter. Is this something that needs to be said? That's the first question. Is this something that needs to be said by you? Is this something that needs to be said by you right now? If you answered no to any of those questions, do not post it. All right, so that wraps up my, one more click. Wraps up my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation on social media and journalism responsibility.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And Ms. Karen Davila shall introduce our panelists.
All right, everyone. So this is the second panel. I'd like all of you to welcome Ambassador John Holmes, Julia Pavellana, a very good friend of mine from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. She's the associate publisher. Professor Luis Teodoro, CMFR member of the Board of Trustees. And of course, Jackie Manabat. Our second session is already, we're going to talk about media responsibility. So I'd like to start off first with a common complaint when it comes to the media. You know, Karen, the problem with the media is when they make a wrong report, if you were in the headlines the first day and they got some things wrong, the apology, the erratum, and correction will be on the 8th page or the 10th page of the paper. A common politician's complaint. So let's start with that because it's quite basic. And it talks about how many people or people in government feel that, you know, that's the problem with established media. You can destroy someone's life by putting them on the headlines, and then if it's a mistake, you won't even give the same space to correct the mistake. And I'd like to start with the Inquirer. The Inquirer, many say, is, the most powerful paper in the Philippines, given not just its history, but the way it writes its stories. It's quite fearless, the headlines. And you've seen many politicians come and go because of the stories in the Inquirer. Is the Inquirer responsible enough to also call itself into account when mistakes have been made?
Thank you, Karen. Yes, the answers are sounding yes. But before I elaborate on that, Ms. Karen, let me please allow me to pay tribute to Ambassador Daniel Bruce and for the also Canada Ambassador Holmes for taking up the cause of press freedom globally and not just in the Philippines, although I find the irony here that these are foreign governments fighting for press freedom. But this is also something that we need to celebrate, we need to applaud. So please, let's have a big round of applause for Ambassador Bruce and Ambassador Holmes. Okay, yes, the hallmark of a great paper, a great responsible paper, is to acknowledge the error. Journalists are humans. We make mistakes. And our policy in the Inquirer is when we make a mistake, we need to acknowledge it. And there are several times that we put the correction or the error on page 1 and with the corresponding apology. And to be fair, we strive very much to put the side of the other side side by side with the original story so that we will not make that appearance that we are biased and not balanced. So yes, there's a policy that we make mistakes, we acknowledge quickly, we correct quickly, and we learn from the experience and move on. Thank you, Karen.
All right, Professor Teodoro, how would you rate or describe Philippine media as a whole based on the many years? You were my professor in the University of the Philippines. You're now with CMFR. When you look at the Philippine press today, would you say that the Philippine press in general also takes accountability for its mistakes and the impact it has on the people they report on?
Well, first of all, I think there are some great journalists in the Philippines. and there are very good media organizations in the Philippines. But as in the case of other countries, there's also a lot of bad journalism in the Philippines. And part of the reason why there's bad journalism is because there's, in some cases, very low appreciation of the ethical and professional standards of journalism. Now, having said that, the thing is that correcting errors is an ethical responsibility. And the Inquirer does have a corrections page. But of course, the ideal would have been to put it on the front page, right? But it's, and that's what you're trying to do. And in the Philippines, there have also been attempts to compel journalists through the self-regulatory mechanisms of journalism to correct themselves and to acknowledge errors. And I think it's very difficult to generalize about the situation in the Philippines. It's a rather complex one. I mean, it's as complex as the political situation. And while you have, on the other hand, great journalists, ethical journalists, very professional journalists, on the other hand, you have the opposite. And in between are journalists who are just indifferent. I mean, there's that, who just look at journalism as a job. I mean, and who, as I think Inday pointed out, would every day think that if they just quote what this person said or that person said, that's the end of the responsibility. I mean, they don't report with discernment. They don't put context in the report and so on. And that means that therefore the public doesn't get a full understanding of what the issues are. So I think that's one problem in the Philippine press.
Ambassador, may I ask you to describe how you, a responsible media in terms of Canada?
Thank you for that. I'll just add one point, I think, on that issue. I think you have to distinguish between the type of error that is being made and the person who's the victim of the error, if you will. I mean, you have to remember that if you enter the public realm, there are benefits and there are risks. So when we're talking about politicians and movie stars and media stars and stuff, you've given up a bit of your freedom and your privacy and certain aspects that the ordinary citizen wouldn't have. So when there is an error in that regard, I think often when we're talking about politicians, they have other avenues to rectify the mistake. Now, I'm not challenging the principle. You should be apologizing. You should acknowledge your mistakes. But when you're talking about an individual, and that's where someone's reputation could be really harmed, when there's an egregious error with respect to a private citizen who has not put himself out there, I think there's a greater obligation to correct it in a commensurate way. Thank you.
So how would you define responsible media? Based on your experience, what you've seen in Canada?
Well, I think the challenges that you see here, I mean some, not all, but some of the challenges you see here, you see everywhere. I mean, we have challenges in social media in Canada. We have questions about ownership and independence of the media. Many of our independent media are disappearing and are being bought up by large corporations or folding. We do have a similar entity to the BBC. We have the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is funded separately at arm's length from the government. But many of the challenges we also see in Canada, and I don't think our media gets it right all the time either. We have, I won't name names, but we have certain media that will write some rather scurrilous reports and not necessarily true, and will peddle in certain fake news, and you don't see the apology or the clarification. If at all, you certainly don't see it on the front page.
All right. Speaking of media responsibility and ethics, I'll ask specific questions. For example, President Duterte's narco list, a list claiming that so-and-so individuals, whether generals, politicians, etc., are involved or suspected of illegal drugs, should the media use that information without verification, without the side of the other person, only because it comes from the office of the president? Is that enough, Professor Teodoro? Because if you're the Inquirer and you don't print it, you'll hate it that the Star printed it. So there's that whole other aspect of competition. What's the right thing to do?
Well, the right thing to do was to report that there is such a list and that it has been released by the president. But the names should not have been mentioned.
Really?
I mean, the reason for that...
Even if they're public officials?
Yes, because the reason for that is there is such a thing as the presumption of innocence. And there is also the fact that you can destroy reputations by just mentioning. And in the particular context of the Philippines now, some people have died because they've been included in such lists. I mean, so you have to be thinking of that.
But isn't that news coming from the president? One might
Well,
argue.
the news is that there is a list that has been released by the president. But the names themselves, I'm saying, you can say how many names there are. And you can say whether these government officials are congressmen or mayors or whatever. But I think you should draw the line at naming the officials concerned.
All right, Juliet, what's the policy of the Inquirer on that?
Well, the first time the president released the narco list way back in 2016, we did publish the names, but we researched on some of the names and we printed in the same story that like there were 3 judges who were already dead.
Yeah.
And then there were other mistakes. So that's the best that we did with some kind of verification.
So you gave doubt to the credibility of the list.
Yeah, it's just actually fact-checking. So we have a very good research department. And it's also because of responsibility, you know, damaging people's reputations. But there's also that public interest aspect of, as you said, this list is coming from the president and is brandishing it all over town. And there are actual people's names involved. So in the second list, we did publish the more prominent names, but as with background also that there were many errors, like different barangays or different names, and in fact that the president, in the first time he released it, he had to apologize to Governor Espino because he was wrongly tagged as a drug lord. So all those contexts we leave to the readers to think for themselves that this list is problematic at best and propaganda at worst.
But clearly the Inquirer, given you're saying out of interest, public interest, you did release the list as is,
yes,
that the president released.
Because some of the names are prominent people and very, you know, many people are affected there. But we needed to put the background, we needed to put the information that the list were contained errors. So
now, what about the new matrix in terms of ethics and social responsibility? I'll ask Jackie later because this policy on the office is where the journalists are tagged as terrorists. There are different media organizations who won't use the list because they say that they're private individuals, they're journalists. But then you also have the public saying, you see how biased established media is? They won't release because it's protecting their own, you know, colleagues. Professor Teodoro, what should media do with a list like that? I mean, here you have the president saying, these are the people that want to oust me. So that's a rebellion charge, a possible one.
Well, for one thing, that entire issuance was full of errors. And I think those errors should be pointed out if ever it is reported. You have to report, of course, that there is this claim, that there is this conspiracy involving 3 media organizations and a lawyers group, and so on, and that it names several people, and so on and so forth. But you have to provide the background, as in the case of the first narco list. You have to provide the background. You have to provide the context in which, for example, part of the context is that PCIJ just a week ago or 2 weeks ago had this story about the president's and his family's wealth. And the backgrounding, I think, is crucial. The context is crucial so that people will understand and be able to sense what the meaning of this is about. Because I think the responsibility of journalists is not just to report the story, it's also to provide the meaning of the story. And that's what was necessary in the particular case of this so-called matrix report. So the particular errors, for example, people who are not lawyers being, I have a colleague from the University of the Philippines who was made a member of the National Union of People's Lawyers, but he's not a lawyer, he's a professor at the College of Mass Communication.
Yeah.
But this Sheila Coronel has been
Yeah.
with Columbia University since
Okay.
2006.
So I think, Professor, what you're saying in effect to the students is just because it came or it comes from the president or Malacanang or the government is, even if it's news, is not to report it as just flatly so, without doing work behind it.
Because what you have, the fundamental task of journalism is to tell the truth, right? And then in order to do that, you have to verify. You have to consult a multiplicity of sources. You have to do the research. You have to talk to experts and so on and so forth. So it's just journalism.
Okay. Now, this one the students can relate to is, should journalists be crusaders or advocates? Here's something all of you can relate to, something neutral, not political: climate change. Climate change is a real issue we face, but then you do have a group in government, in the US especially, that says it's not real. Jackie, how do you deal with that, being a journalist? Is it right for journalists to advocate on something?
Well, for me, I advocate for something. I advocate for road safety. I advocate for the consumer rights, for the passenger rights. I think that's what makes us human. For a very long time, journalists are seen as aloof, as robots, actually. So when we advocate for something, we are seen as humans, and it gives you credibility to talk about something, to make that niche and be an expert of something. I cover consumer stories and road transportation stories, and when I advocate for these stories, I see a momentum of change. And when they believe you that you're advocating or you're genuine when you're telling this story, and it makes my story. My story gets more impact from the audience, and I like that change in journalism right now. It's engaging, it's creating a community of change.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, should journalists be advocates, crusaders?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think they should never forget that they are journalists. So I go back to some of the earlier presentations and Jackie's great presentation. You're still obligated to report the truth. Ideally, you're obligated to report both sides. So as a representative of a government, oftentimes we're given unrealistic deadlines in terms of getting back to journalists to get our side of the story, and we just can't send our personal views. We've got to get these things cleared. So you'll see stories come out that are skewed to one side because the journalist has a deadline and they either don't give us enough time to get the clearance to get it out there. So you get a one-sided kind of story. Mind you, I'll speak frankly here, sometimes our own ability to interact with the media is hamstrung by our own bureaucratic tendencies. So I would love to be more open with the media and get stories out there, but that's not always possible. So I think if a journalist believes in a particular issue, by all means, pursue it, get it out there. But maintain your journalistic standards when you do so.
All right. How do you do that, Juliet, in the Inquirer? One of the most read sections in the Inquirer is the editorial, the opinion column. What is the process of the Inquirer in doing that? You don't know, right? The editorial, you have no idea.
The editorial is really taking sides. because it is the voice of the paper. So when an editorial talks about, for example, the drug war, and it's very critical, that's the voice of the paper. It's a certain advocacy.
What do you mean of the paper?
The voice of the inquirer.
So the
we
inquirer
are taking a stand.
side.
As a paper, we are taking a stand, we are taking a side, but that is the editorial. And the opinion column, the columnists, they are free because by definition, they are columnists. They need to be opinionated. So what they write is really biased or partisan, or others really a stand that they are taking. That is to differentiate it from the news reports and the news reporters. The news reporters need to be objective. They cannot put their biases into their stories, into their posts, etc. But in general, the media is really an advocate. We are an advocate for truth. We stand for good government, for democracy, freedom, for the environment, for climate change. But we let our stories talk about those advocacies. As long as we do not become very partisan, the reporters can speak to the facts. For example, climate change. Okay, these are the many disasters that have happened in the Philippines as a result of climate change. When you are a news reporter and you're taking a certain advocacy, very passionate, for example, even the harmless things, for example, you're advocating for dogs, then the cat people will get angry at you. So you need to be objective, fair, and balanced if you are a news reporter. But if you are a columnist, then by all means you can talk like Inday. And you can talk like everybody. Whatever you want to say, go ahead. And the editorial, that's taking a specific stand. So that's the voice of the paper. That's how we do it.
This is quite interesting for the students here. I'll ask about the word biased. And di ba when you open Facebook, it's not your biased. It's your bias. Did you notice that? Your bias. Okay, Professor Jackie, is being biased or partisan, Professor, really all that bad? The New York Times endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. I mean, if you talk about partisan or biasness, you could say that is so biased. And then one could say, but was that really wrong? Don't you want to help voters out there? Oh, isn't that interesting? That's the New York Times. The very company that said we cover impartially without fear or favor. And yet they took a stand and endorsed Hillary Clinton. So, Professor, is being biased all that bad?
Well, in the first place, bias is indefensible. I mean, meaning it's indefensible with facts. Something that can be
That's a good one. Can you listen to the students?
Something that can be defended with facts is not bias. It's taking a stance. And by the way, Philippine newspapers before martial law used to do that. They used to endorse candidates. They would say, okay, we're supporting Fernando Lopez, for example, for vice president because of the following. I mean, there's a basis for them.
But
you're not just saying that I like this person, period. You're saying, I want this person to be elected because, etc.
So that's all right?
I think it's all right. I think there's room for I think it's even more honest for media organizations to do that.
Okay.
Because some media organizations do support certain candidates, but they're not saying it outright.
No.
So for maybe you, it's better to say it outright. And
for
that's
you.
what was happening before the martial law period.
Okay, that's quite interesting. That's a very controversial side. Go, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, I just wanted to ask you a question, Karen. Given who Hillary was running against, who do you think they should have? I mean, come on.
That's a whole different argument. No, but see, the question then, that's a quotable quote, huh? What you said, that's a quotable quote for an ambassador. That's a quotable quote.
Thank you. Just remember, I'm the ambassador from the UK, remember?
That's a good one. No, okay.
I
All
think
right.
for 2020,
Yeah.
the same
Okay, but then,
principle holds.
okay, no, but just to further the conversation, huh? The very problem why Facebook has come to this kind of power is the argument that the elites choose what's news, we choose who to endorse, which became the problem recently in the 2016 elections. Unsaid, you said, a media companies professor in the Philippines now don't endorse openly. But then voters can feel the bias. So in a way, that's the rise of Facebook today because it's taking power back. That's how people feel.
No, it's true. I mean, the rise of Facebook and other social media have empowered people. I mean,
It's the frustration with established
Yes.
media.
They're saying, for example, that one of the problems of old media, meaning broadcasting and print, is that there is a gatekeeping process, for example. I mean, you don't get the news out.
Gatekeepers.
Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, however, because gatekeeping does protect, to some extent, readers from false information, for example, or libelous utterances and so forth. Now, while there is an upside to social media in the sense that it has empowered billions of people and who are now capable of exercising the right to communicate, which by the way is a human right. The right to communicate is a human right. There is, however, a downside to social media, and the downside is that anybody can say whatever he wants without anyone betting.
So
Betting it.
is gatekeeping bad? For the students here, is gatekeeping bad? For example, there's a senatorial candidate who you feel is ridiculous. You know who will lose. Should that candidate, without naming names, still be given airtime in a Senate debate? Or should that candidate be featured by the Inquirer? Or should that candidate be profiled by TV Patrol? Given there are right now 35 senatorial candidates ba ilan? 64. 64. Did you know that? Are you all voters? There are 64 senatorial candidates, and part of the responsibility that media does is gatekeep, which is, technically, you have the editors deciding, oh, please invite this person to the debate. Let's do a feature on this person. And they skip a lot. Is that wrong? Is that not impartial? Isn't that unfair? That could be an argument.
Well, gatekeeping is important because you cannot just put there, he said, she said, they said. In terms of the election, it's really letting the news cycle take its course with critical guidance from the editors. So, meaning if they said something so outrageous, they said a policy that's so inimical to public interest, it's our responsibility to highlight that or to point that out because that's part of the voter education. We have a responsibility to educate the voters, and we have a responsibility to promote good government. So we need to exercise some form of editorial judgment, but always keeping in mind that we're doing this for the national interest, for the good of the greatest number, because we're for the people. It's not really because I like this senator, I like this senator. No personal biases there. You always think of the greatest good, of the greatest number of the people. That's
All right.
how.
Jackie, in editorial meetings for TV Patrol, how are stories decided? I mean, you have TV Patrol, which is the #1 newscast that's viewed over by 60 million Filipinos. So imagine to get airtime on TV Patrol for an angle, a story, an advocacy. Isn't it a bias, frankly speaking, when you have an editor who's pro like this, an editor who's anti like this? Doesn't that shape the news? Doesn't that dictate what's important for the day?
I think that's what sets us apart from being commentators. We're news reporters. For TV Patrol audience, what I think the editors are doing is that editorial judgment, like what Ms. Juliet here mentioned a while ago. And may I reiterate what...
You can share the process.
Yes. So,
how are stories chosen?
Okay, so we reporters, we pitch stories, or sometimes our desk editors give us assignments, so it's up to us how we develop those stories. So during the day, the editors huddle and do this brainstorming, and then they pick stories which they think will be relevant to the audience. And I just want to share what Ted Filon, one of our TV anchors, taught me when I was still his producer for Filon Ngayon. He told me, whenever you do a story, you ask yourself, anong pakialam mo? Anong pakialam mo? Kapag may pakialam
Say it in English.
Sorry.
Yeah. The foreigners in the room.
Why do you care? So that's loose
why
translation.
should you care?
Why should one care?
Okay,
Why should I care? So when you have a solid answer to that question, that is a story. You mentioned we have 60 plus senatorial 65 candidates, and you can't squeeze them in that airtime that we have. If we do that, the audience will be bored, and at the end of the day, we're still business, and we have to still get your attention. So
and
it's
still,
finite.
Airtime is finite.
Airtime is finite, right? So when you have a solid answer to that question, why should you care? Why should one care? That's the story. And yes, it depends on editorial judgment, and I think that's not bias at all.
Okay. All right, Professor, have local media been also abusive in choosing what's important? I mean, honestly speaking.
The answer to that is yes, of course. I mean, the reason for that is because there are a lot of factors pressuring individual journalists, media organizations, and so on and so forth. There's also the issue of incompetence. I mean, I'm sorry to have to say this, but there's also the issue of incompetence. There's also the issue of not having enough background or enough understanding of a particular issue, and so on and so forth. So the thing is that what you need in Philippine media is to raise the skills as well as the ethical standards.
Should the Manila Times have printed the matrix?
No.
Coming from the President's office?
No, in the first place, it is not journalism, it's public relations. And it was written by a public relations person who, among others, was the publicist of Mrs. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and who is now the special envoy of President Duterte for, what is that? Some mouthful of a title. I mean,
so no. Okay,
International media relations or something.
Yeah. Juliet, would the Inquirer have released the matrix? Let's say one of your reporters got the scoop.
Not if it came from, obviously from the president or because obviously it is some kind of a guesswork. Really meant a propaganda. Maybe we could have written a story, but not print the whole thing, the way it came out because of all those questionable links, etc. Maybe the only news value to that is, hey, there's again this matrix from Malacanang naming certain journalists as involved, but not print the whole matrix.
Okay, wait, my apologies. It's almost 5 to 7 o'clock. Can I have one question from the floor before we wrap up this panel? Please, one question. Okay, go ahead, ma'am. Thank you. Come on. Yes, I didn't know it was closed. Yes.
So I'm Inka from 2ABCom, and my question is, given that media is more personalized to our individual taste, in the case that it's our responsibility to know certain facts, but in the case that the person doesn't care, what then do social media platforms like ABS-CBN or Rappler do to engage people to give more concern to what they say rather than what is openly available in our Facebook or Twitter feed?
Okay, I'll let Jackie take this. Just to let you know, ABS-CBN, there was a stockholders meeting recently. ABS-CBN News, Philippines, is ranks in the top 30 news portals online all over the world. So, which just goes to show that Filipinos are really heavy on online, so to speak. Maganda yung tanong niya.
Yes.
What does ABS-CBN do you mean, right, to engage the indifferent, no? Correct?
Yes.
Well, as you mentioned, Facebook. We're big on Facebook, on Twitter, and on social media. And I think that's an important tool for ABS-CBN because the crowd is already there. So me as a journalist, I am told to post my stories digital first. So yes, it's digital first. So whenever I'm covering a story, I'm tweeting here, writing for online here, and here writing for broadcast news. So, it's a balancing act now for journalists. And what did you ask
You're
about?
doing all of it alone?
All of it alone. So that's why my job right now is senior multi-platform journalist, but because not only I'm serving for TV Patrol News, I'm also writing for Pantila. That's another market.
Yes.
And also I'm going
for ANC, which is the English market.
Of course, Business Nightly and etc. And we also have the online news for the website, and we have to live tweet. I think you're very much aware of live tweeting, yeah?
Oh, so it's changed.
It
Clearly
has
the news
changed.
has
I mean,
changed.
there's a big change for coverage right now, but I think I'm an advocate of social media and digital journalism, but I think the problem here with digital journalism is sometimes we lack in the storytelling, in the depth of storytelling, because what we're prioritizing right now is we get the news
First.
Yeah. Yes. We get the news first. Because when the audience doesn't see that particular information that he or she's looking for in our platform, the audience says, we gotta get out of here, look for other platforms that has this and that. So we lose that kind of crowd. The audience now is an on-demand society. So they use several platforms to get their information, and that's important for the new journalists right now, and the upcoming journalists. You have to take note of that. That there's no new or old media. There's just media, and we have to catch up on that quickly. And you were asking on how we're going to captivate or get our audience because of all this new social media engagement. I've mentioned a while ago, on Facebook, the people there are the masses, the class DE, so you talk to them in Filipino in a way that they can understand, because the
So that's
trolls
not
are
opinion,
there.
that's a study.
That's a study. So the trolls are there, the bots are there, the bashers are there. They're using the Filipino language, and you have to do the same. You have to make them relate to you. That's why, personally, I post sometimes personal posts, like when I go to this place. That's what makes you human. What makes you relatable to the people. So that's what you do on Facebook. So that makes it relatable. On Twitter, we have there the thinking audience. So you can give them straight news right away, but right there and then they want that snappy tweeting. But because if you don't get the information out that quickly, they tend to go to other platforms, and we do not want that.
Yeah.
There's always someone who wanted to take that lunch.
Yeah, that's stressful.
Yes, and it is stressful.
Okay.
The way I am speaking right now, it's quite stressful,
Yeah.
but we have to keep up with the times.
Okay, I'll start. This is the closing statement already. I'll start already. That was your closing statement. Juliet, go ahead. This
Just
is to
very
close
quickly,
already.
how to engage in our generation as journalists. We say, let the facts become sexy. In your generation,
Yan.
it's make the facts visual. So we present photos, videos, infographics, and very snappy headlines because you're the 40-character readers. You don't read through
140 na.
140
Ilan na ba?
characters.
140.
So you don't
Talaga?
read through the whole
Yeah.
thing. So that's how we engage you. And please, students, you're our future. Please be critical. Go to reputable media organizations
Agreed.
for your facts. Thank you.
Amen. Ambassador, I'll let Professor close.
Thank you.
it.
I'm just
Yeah.
waiting for Keanu Reeves to appear to explain what the heck this matrix is.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to make that joke earlier on, actually. You got me. Would the young kids know the Matrix? You do? Fairness. Talaga naman. Okay. So, Mr. Ambassador, anything you want to say before we close?
Yeah, just
Media
very quickly, you raised
responsibility.
a very good question earlier, and we didn't really get into it. The first panel talked a little bit about it, and that is the question of elites and the elite domination of the mainstream media and stuff. And that's a whole debate in and of itself. But one of the, I think, side effects is that the notion of experts has been tarnished, and they're not necessarily representative of the elite. So we have challenges to academia, to scientists. I mean, look at the climate change debate where, you know, the great preponderance of scientific evidence is that it exists and it's having immediate impacts, and yet many people who should be responsible deny that it exists. So, and they say, oh, these are experts, and we don't have to believe them anymore. So my message would be, yes, there's a lot of expertise out there, people who know what they're doing and they have studied particular issues. So get the facts, get the information before you jump to conclusions. Don't just stick to your own little network of media. Go out, you know, I read opposition papers, you know, in Canada, in the United States, in Europe and stuff. I mean, opposition views that I don't necessarily agree with, because I want to know what the other side is thinking, what they're formulating their basis on, and look at what the experts are saying. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Professor, I'll let you have the last statement, as this is for the students who may end up becoming journalists in the future.
Well, I don't want to discourage anybody, but journalism, journalism in the dangerous profession. I mean, there are 164 journalists who have been killed since 1986 in this country, and only 14 cases have been resolved. And at the same time, as Pia mentioned, there were 83 attacks last year against journalists, and our listing in the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility has increased. It's now about 94 cases. I mean, so there are all these things. But journalism is a necessary enterprise in a society that would become a democracy. I'm saying that we are not yet a democracy, and that the democratization process that began with the propaganda period and the revolutionary period of Philippine history is continuing and must continue. And one of the ways through which this can continue is through good, honest, responsible journalism. Now, how do you go about that? I mean, one of the ways through which you can enhance your reach is through social media. I'm a columnist for a conservative newspaper owned by an Ateneo alumnus. and I get I reach about 200,000 every week through Facebook. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. I mean, a tweet, one of my tweets, for example, reached...
So you can tweet, huh? You can tweet. Okay, so you can tweet, huh? I'm impressed.
The idea that older people are not familiar with the new technologies is an ageist bias.
This is good. So you can tweet.
I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I have a website, it's luisteodoro.com.
Good. Or are you dictating to a secretary? Tweet this. That's 20. Di naman. Like you're really
No, one of my recent
tweeting.
tweets, I was going to say, reached 8,000 people. I mean,
Yeah, of course, I understand. Yes. So, in the end, journalism is dangerous, but
Yes.
hey, it's a necessary.
It's necessary. It's something that we must keep at. I mean, I've often been asked, okay, I mean, it seems as if nothing is changing and things are getting worse. What are we going to do? What we're going to have to do is to keep at it.
Okay.
Despite the difficulties. And there are a lot of journalists who are doing the best that they can in a terrible situation. They're risking life, limb, and fortune daily just to get the information out. And these are the journalists whom we must support. And I don't have to name who they are because you know who they are, or you should know who they are. On the other hand, there are so-called journalists whom we must condemn and whom we must not patronize, whom we must not believe because their track records speak for themselves.
Good job on that. I so agree. I am so against media corruption in any form. Please thank our panelists. Thank you. Let's have a photo. And to the students in the room, remember, information is power. Learn to use it wisely. Do not share on Facebook if you have not verified it to be true. Thank you very much.
Thank you, speakers and panelists. We would like to request the audience to bear with us and stay with us a little while longer as we show our gratitude to our speakers. So again, I'd like to call on the officials from Ateneo, Father Jose Villarin, Attorney Jimmy Hofilenia, and Dr. Fernando Aldaba to present our tokens of appreciation from Ateneo, as well as His Excellencies Daniel Cruz and John Holmes to present our token from our embassies. A round of applause, please, for our speakers and panelists. So we'll have one group photo. So kindly stay on stage, panelists and officials. We'll have one group photo with everyone. If you have further posts, please again use hashtag pahayag and hashtag defend media freedom. Of course, we'd also like, thank you. Of course, we'd also like to thank our exceptional and admirable moderator, Ms. Karen Davila. Our ambassador shall present her tokens of appreciation. Maybe we can have another photo with the flowers. The big one. Okay, thank you everyone. Panelists may now leave the stage. However, our Ateneo officials and ambassadors would still have to remain. You would have one last exchange of tokens between the Ateneo and our embassies. In case you were wondering, the tokens from the embassies would be the Winston Churchill bench, which contains the quote, "A free press is the unsleeping guardian of every other right that free men prize. It is the most dangerous foe of tyranny." So one last photo with the ambassadors and Ateneo officials, please. Again, we are grateful to our university partners, Ateneo de Manila University, De La Salle University, Miriam College, Far Eastern University, St. Paul University Manila, and the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So a lot has already been said. We are also grateful to everyone who attended today. We are grateful to the British ambassador, our Canadian ambassador, the British Embassy, and the Canadian Embassy in Manila. We will just have one last group photo with all of our panelists. And our Ateneo officials as well. And also Ms. Karen Davila. So all speakers, all panelists, and officials. One last group photo. If you would like to, you could also take their photo. And again, please use hashtag Defend Media Freedom and hashtag Pahayag. Another round of applause, please, for everyone. Thank you. So this concludes our forum, Pahayag, a forum on media freedom and responsibility. Thank you very much and good evening. For our student participants, please take the exit at the back. For our media representatives and representatives from government and foreign ministries, kindly take this exit to the left of the stage. So once again, student participants, kindly exit at the back. Media representatives and representatives from foreign missions and government, kindly take the exit to